know, I'm always, as you all know, at the outset of every meeting, looking for some young person to do the Pledge of Allegiance, but it seems to be the last couple meetings we haven't had any truly young people here. So, again, in one of those embarrassing moments, I'm going to have to pick the youngest out of us old folks. And Rodney, I think that would be you. Would that be you? Yes, I think that would be you. Yeah, I think that's about right. Let's give him a round of applause so he can help lead us in this pledge. Oh, wait a second. Oh, wait. I didn't, I'm sorry. She was sitting way down. I didn't see her. You want to come lead us in the pledge? Oh, yes. Yeah, all right. The young Commissioner Shepard coming up. Next time, Rodney. Yeah. All right. Or you could do it with your mom, Mike, or wherever you want to. Okay, go there with your mom. All right.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Okay. We have no minutes from our prior meeting, so that makes it easier. I should note that it seems very unfortunate throughout the course of this nation's news cycle, there always does seem to be something unfortunately, sadly, worth a moment of silence, and I apologize if I don't remember all those moments. There's so many of them, sadly. But I do recall reading about a police officer in New York City who was shot and killed, and that is certainly a moment that certainly is deserving of a moment of silence. But as we do that, without diminishing the loss that that officer and his family is experiencing, let us not forget the senseless loss of life that is experienced every day in communities across this country, rich and poor, black and white, some of them wearing uniforms, some of them people who sadly are injured by people who wear uniforms. No matter what the loss of life is, it is always tragic, and by recognizing this officer, I don't want people to misunderstand the fact that communities across this country experience this kind of loss every day. And it is not, and I might be criticized for this, it's not that this officer wears a uniform that makes his loss so tragic. It is the simple loss of life and the loss that that represents to his family. And again, people are experiencing this kind of loss every day. And we should share a moment of silence for all those families, including that officer in New York City. All right, we have speakers addressing an agenda item, and I have Howard Eagle as the one speaker for today. Mr. Eagle, as you make your way to the front, you're the only person I would say this to today. You realize we have a 3-minute time limit, and when that time limit expires, we ask that you wrap up your comments. Thank you, Mr. Eagle.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm speaking as a representative of the Take It Down Planning Committee, Faith Community Alliance, Movement for Anti-Racist Ministry and Action, and as a Rochester City School District parent, local, state, and federal taxpayer. We saw from the website that the search firm, the superintendent search firm got roughly 500, 600, 700 responses, and that would include focus groups, the one community forum they had, and the online survey. We note that the vast majority, we're certain that the vast majority of those responses do not represent the main demographic in this school district in terms of parents and families. So that the 54,000 roughly parents and families are not really represented in that demographic. In fact, we're hearing that most of the responses, especially online, are from what would be middle-class white educators, teachers, administrators, and so forth. So we just wanted to remind the board again that we believe, we're convinced that you missed an opportunity to get genuine, authentic parent community engagement in this process from beginning to end, had you adopted Commissioner White's original proposal that included a community advisory group. And we want to say to you that in our view, it's not too late to still get community engagement, authentic community parent engagement through an advisory group that could be involved in the interviewing process of all the candidates, not just the finalists, the 3 finalists, but all the candidates, and could be involved in the selection process. Otherwise, we do understand that a dysfunctional board, under the advice of a search firm that has told you that being dysfunctional doesn't matter, will make the decision, and we acknowledge that that's your legal right. But if you do that, we think that whoever you choose, the person will begin working as superintendent of this school district under a shadow. And the shadow will be that many of us in the community will not believe that you chose the best person in the process. In fact, many of us will not believe that necessarily that the best person in the process even made the final 3. And so that's going to be a shadow for certain that's going to happen if you just proceed the way you're proceeding. And it'll look like deja vu. We've been here before over and over again, and you know that. So again, the major message from our coalition is it's not too late.
Thank you, Mr. Eagle. Well, on that note, we're fortunate to have the firm BWP here, and they're going to provide a presentation to the full board with respect to where they are with respect to the candidate profiles, the findings from the community forum, focus groups, interviews, and surveys. Mr. Kastner?
President White, members of the board. My name is Kevin Kastner, and I'm a director for BWP. And I'm assisted by my colleagues this evening, Dr. Mack and Dr. McKendrick, and each of us will have a part in this presentation. The information that we're presenting is all public record. Board members, I've noticed you have a copy of some of this information at your desk. Francine, I want to ask you a question. We have a report here, and the report is about 14 pages. That 14-page report, I'm not sure if that's in there verbatim, but we want to make sure you have a copy of that, because in the report that we have, we actually have a descriptor of many, many items beyond what we will just give a summary of during our report. So this document here reflects the work that we did when we were visiting the city and also the data. The second piece of information that board members have is the results of the online survey. Now, the online survey, we will give highlights, but if you want to look at it in further detail, you'll have that. And the third item will be, in fact, the the PowerPoint that we're presenting that has highlights. When we were in the community, we made point that when we take a document and we share it with the public and we share it with school board members, the community is our accountability. Whether we got it right or did not get it right, whether we were working with a representative group that had a different opinion than the larger community, all of you are best to know that. But because that's the way the process works, then that's what tonight is all about. A point in time where we're making a report to you that you might want to consider putting on your website, and then it could be part of the discussion of the superintendent process. The whole idea of having a community engagement process is to talk about the community having an understanding and a support of the search process, to ensure the broadest participation that we can get when we organize it. Obviously, it was pointed out that there's a lot of people that did not participate, but whether it's representative or not, that's what the public record will, I guess, give you the opportunity to see. One of the things that we tried to do was identify the perceived strengths and challenges of the school district, and we then also wanted to talk about the qualities and characteristics of the next superintendent, what they should possess and demonstrate. In doing this, when we took the time to go through 27 meetings, we had 4 forums, we had 2 forums, one in the afternoon and one in the evening. We lost our last forum due to weather, which would have been that last night, but in doing this, that is qualitative information in which we took notes in all the presentations. At the same time, we have an online survey. The online survey closed on February 15th, and we had 455 responses. Just to point at least how surveys work. When we ran the data for 225 people that did the survey, and then we ran the data for 455, there wasn't but a % difference in the categories that people pointed out were the highest categories that they were talking about. When you look at the survey itself, 75% of the people on the survey were staff. The largest percentage of the staff that took the survey were teachers. 25% were members of the community. So when you get to a point when you have something over 50%, then you're talking about, out of 455, you're talking about, roughly 225 people. Now, in my past experience in doing the survey, it does usually come up and it gets validated that the highlights of the survey are very similar to what we hear when we talk to all the people. Again, you're going to be able to check that out and see if we've got this thing right. But when we get involved in doing this, when we talk, and I will apologize, we had a typo or two that I caught on the plane today, and I'm sorry for that. The secretary was out. I didn't do as good a job as I should have. I take responsibility for that, but I don't think it changes any of the meaning. So what we tried to do in capturing the information, if we heard something that was isolated just by one person, that wasn't a trend. So, but we started, when we looked at all the notes, and we're talking about a stack of notes that we all took during the time that we had, we started seeing patterns. And what we're trying to represent are the patterns. And in doing the representation of the patterns, and we looked at some of the prominent responses, what we want to try to do is try to show how this all fits together. We asked 3 questions when we talked to all the groups. What do you see as the strengths of the Rochester City School District? What do you see as the greatest challenges facing the district? And what skills, experiences, and characteristics will the next superintendent need to possess and demonstrate. To do this, we're going to have Dr. McKendrick go through the part of the report that talks about the quantitative and qualitative information in a sequential way, giving you a lot of the highlights. You can find more detail when you read the entire report. And then Dr. Mack is going to show you what we think represents a draft leadership profile that's based upon the data that we had in the report that Paul will give to you. Paul?
Good evening. Before I get to this, I would like to just mention a couple of things. Some of what Dr. Kastner mentioned is that when you're looking at surveys like this, a lot of your responses, I'm sure all of you know this, so please pardon me for telling you something that you don't know, that you know, but it's also for the audience also. Your sample determines, of course, the responses that you get, and it's the number and then who fills it out. So that is what we're looking at. The second thing is that we're presenting this information to you, but in presenting the information, any points that we mention here, or all of the points collectively, in no way indicates that you cannot use this data and expand it. Say, for instance, when you're looking at your profile, Percy's going to come up and talk about the profile. And that profile is based on the data that we got from those surveys and from the forums that we have. But you, as board members, of course, and probably even more important, fact that you are citizens in this city, you know what your system looks like, you know what you need and want in a superintendent, and so we may present item A, B, and C, and it may not reflect items X, Y, Z that you would like, and so in presenting this information, we are in no way telling you that, and the presentation of the data in no way says that you cannot include or bring something else in other points that you would like. We're presenting the information that we got from the community. And the third thing that I'd like to mention is that this is also a part of us being as transparent as we can. We're going to present to you some items. We're going to give you the top 3, but in a lot of cases there were far more information. But as Kevin mentioned, in some cases those were prominent responses. In some cases they were just 1 or 2. And we can give all of that information to you in the hopes then that we are further in the transparency that we really mentioned, and I think that which the board wants to have. I should have asked you which one am I using.
The arrow, the right arrow.
Okay. I'm sorry. So when you look at the strengths of the school system, the ones that we have here are, you really had a lot of strengths in the system. And what we're looking at, of course, that with teachers, education options, resources. You also had some references to the programs that you had in the system for educational programs for students. There was also a mention of the diversity in the system. And again, we are presenting the 3. But as people who have lived in this city, and those of you who have been on board for any number of years know that there are other strengths in your system. Some of those that we have are presented here. But again, in the last slide, those were the 3 that were most prominent in the survey. Next, we were looking at the issues that were facing the school system in the next 5 years, funding being one, which is something that almost all systems face at almost all times. instruction and curriculum tied with education programs and options. And then there was the other with personnel. Some of the other items presented that were not in the top three. Your distinguished educators report, I'm not going to go through all of these because you have the information. The action plan and the response, turnover rate of superintendent, accountability, and meeting the needs of a diverse group. You also had some others that did not make the list that we have here, and some of those include turnover rate of minority teachers, the fact that you have too few minority teachers, suspension of black boys, especially minority students, lack of accountability across the system, governance with the school board and management of the system itself, poverty, nepotism, low passage rate of state tests, number of schools in receivership. Schools seem to work in silos. 20% of students in special education, with more than half of those students in self-contained. And so all of those responses were given to us at the forums that we had, but again, the four or the three that we showed you on that previous slide were the top ones. And I'm giving you this, pardon me? Oh, that's right. Yeah, those are the others on that. Okay. But that list that I gave you would represent, this is more than anything else, I don't want anyone to think that we were not being forthright when we heard the information that came to us. And so I want everyone to know that these were responses that we heard from the community. We made note of all of this, but again, the four or the three that you had in that the second slide, the previous slides, those are the ones that came up at top two or three. Skills that were important for the next superintendent. And there you have communication, organization, and management. Characteristics of the next superintendent, commitment to the community, integrity, and good judgment. And then some of the responses there that we got, a knowledge of teaching and learning, strong teaching and learning background, someone who's an instructional leader, a visionary for the system, person who has experience in turnaround schools, someone with a strong understanding of special ed, and the importance of compliance with federal programs, someone who has the ability to evaluate successful instructional programs and therefore eliminate those that are not successful in improving teaching and learning. So again, the whole idea was so that you get an idea of all of the comments that we had. Make sure I'm in sync with what we're doing. Experiences. Okay. And then here you're looking at the experiences that you would like, that the community wanted the superintendent to have. Someone who has the experience with multicultural community, strategic planning. We mentioned that about a classroom teacher or instruction, and then experience with a proven track record and successes. And then these were some of those characteristics that we mentioned earlier: visionary, politically savvy manager, servant leader, proven track record and successes in multicultural communicator, someone who values input of your community. And again, these were the data that we got from the community. If you notice in most of those responses, you didn't see a lot with instruction. You didn't see a lot with instructional leadership. And that is the reason why I was giving that comment earlier, because you as a board, you would know then that that's a really important piece of what this person is supposed to do. So the point of it is that while this is the information that we gave to the community, it does not preclude the board from looking at it and saying, there are some other things that we need in our school system. And because from the perspective of you as board members and as parents and or as a school board member and residents, you know exactly what you need in your board, in your superintendent, and our recommendation would be to take some of the information that we've presented here. I'm sure we'll continue to listen to your community and use some of those ideas and come up with the idea of what that profile should look like. And Dr. Mack is going to now come forward and give you the information about what we found in the profile. And again, the profile is a draft. It was information that was taken from the information that you just saw. And he will give you the procedures and how we will proceed from there with approval from the board.
Good evening, everyone. Okay, the profile. This profile is a draft. This profile is something that you guys will take under consideration, see if you want to make any changes to it. The only thing that we're requesting is that that takes place within maybe a week or two, so that we could get this out and so that people can see it and start applying for this position. So if you want to add anything, or take anything away, that's fine, but we need you to get consensus as soon as you possibly can with that. What the descriptors we're looking at are 4 areas that compose the profile. We are saying that these are the areas from the information received from the community and from board members as we went around and spoke with all of the individuals. The school system is seeking a visionary and innovative instructional leader, a person who has experience, a person who has shown great work in prior districts that are culturally diverse, and individuals who have been known in their communities, being a part of their communities, because we're looking for someone to come into this community and be an intricate part of the community as you would like them to have. One of the areas is instruction, a strong understanding of teaching and learning process. It's very important because instruction is the driver in your school district. Demonstrated success in turnaround experiences that improve student achievement in schools. That person should be able to show where they've been, that they've been successful, and students have improved during their tenure. A proven track record of success with English language learners and with special education programs to make sure that those students are receiving the best experiences that they can in the least restrictive environments so that they are successful in their schoolwork. A strong understanding of programs that address social and emotional issues of students. We're having a lot of that now. And so schools are having to take on that role as well. So you want your leader to have some experience in that area. The next area we move to is management. You want an ethical manager who demonstrates fiscal and operational expertise. One of the things that came out during the presentation of the community was that they felt that funding of the school district was very important. So you want someone who has a track record of showing that their budgets have met their budgets, not individuals who have overspent budgets, and that type thing. You want people who have met their budgets and even come in under budget, so that additional funding can go to children. So that's very important that you look into that, and that human resources needs to prioritize to ensure that when school starts, you have teachers in as many classrooms as you can get them. You know, of course, there are going to always be situations where you might have a class or two, but you don't want to have large vacancies within your school district. So you want someone who understands the human resource element of the schools to make sure that your schools are staffed. You want to have a decision maker that can take on difficult issues. In a school district, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to have difficult issues. You have to be collaborative, you have to work with people, but you have to have a leader that, you know, when you get into a stalemate, that person has a track record of showing that they can step up and make the right decision even in difficult times. It's somewhat easy to make decisions when it's going easy, but in difficult times, you really have to show that you're a great decision maker. You want a leader who understands strategic planning. You want to know where you're going to be in the next 5 years. You want to know, you want things to be measurable. You want your goals to be measurable and achievable. You want someone to set goals that the district can hit, and you can measure if you made it or if you did. It'd be very clear in that situation. Had a lot of partnerships, a lot of individuals who work with the school district. That leader should be able to maintain and increase those partnerships that work with the school system. Because we all know that you have to have the external environment working with the internal environment to make things work well for students. You want that person to be in the schools, not just as it's on my calendar, but someone who enjoys being in the schools, who enjoys being in classrooms, who enjoys going to the schools and speaking to the cafeteria workers or the custodians, and everybody who works within the school that has to make that school run and run effectively. So you want that type of person. You want a person, again, we talked a little earlier about being collaborative, but has the courage, and courage is a key word in leadership, that has the courage to make the difficult decision. And you want someone who has great communication skills, because you as a leader, you have to be able to communicate to those individuals who have to carry out. And if you have a great communicator, then that gets done. You want someone who's open, transparent, approachable. You know, if someone comes up in the community to them, that they will have conversation, even if it can't be a long one, to be able to discuss with someone, maybe take a phone number, I'll call you back, you know, and do that. And not only just in the school, but in the community, working with students, staff, parents, the unions, and everyone in this community, because everyone plays a part. Personal qualities and leadership attributes serves as a unifying force in a diverse community. The superintendent should be the face of your district out and about in the community, and inspires others by leading with integrity, fairness, equity. It's a team builder and a servant leader. Someone who people can say, well, I might not have agreed with it, but I think it's fair. And that's difficult sometimes. Hears from others, to make tough and courageous decisions in the best interest of children. An individual who works with the staff rather than someone where the staff works for the person. You're looking for someone who holds high expectations. In other words, everyone is accountable. Everyone is expected to perform their duties to the highest level that they possibly can. Because as you do that, your children are going to receive the benefits of the work of the staff. And someone who addresses, deals with, and helps resolve issues of race, racism, and equity. This time, Mr. Kastner will come back and we'll take questions.
Vice President Elliott?
I just want to make sure that I heard you say that from the survey, those who participated in that, 75% of those were teachers?
No.
Okay.
75% were staff. Of the 75%, a large majority were teachers. You will see that breakout.
So they
in the
were
report.
employed at the Rochester City School
Yes,
District?
yes,
So the
ma'am.
remaining 25% were?
25% are members of your community, approximately.
Okay.
And 75% are employed in the district. And of that 75%, so if you've got 300 people, of that 300 people, a majority of that 300 people were teachers.
Does that skew the results? Does that take into account, how do you balance it being teachers and staff with community? And should there be a weight on that? In other words, should the results that were from community be more important than staff and teachers, for example?
You know, I think that's a good question, but I think it's more of a composite. When you end up, whether it's from the community or whether it's from staff, you're still looking for leadership. You're still looking for people with integrity. They're going to have agreement on a lot of those issues. If you see an outlier issue that's more predominant in your community than in the school system, then all of a sudden you as a board have to talk about that. One of those outlier issues might be institutional racism. Well, that's a word that's very serious in Rochester. You don't see that necessarily on the report of the data, but we heard that every group we talked to, that came up. That's why we put it out there. So that type of balance, I think you're going to have to make. In my experience, whether it's internal people or external people, when you combine it, I think we're pretty comfortable we picked the gist of it. But if we've missed something,
Well,
that's why you want people out
yeah.
there telling you what we might have
Right.
missed.
The issue for me is when you have a 85% teaching population or staff population that's white, and you have a student population that's the reverse, African American and people of color, then it says to me that there may be some skewness, if that's the correct statistical term. So that's a concern for me. And then when I look at the top 3 strengths from the RCSD, and 56% of those that were surveyed say that we have excellent teachers and staff. You know, are they calling themselves excellent? Because I would think that if we had that many, more than half, who are excellent, we would have a higher graduation rate, we would have greater test scores, and so that's my concern with that. So.
I understand.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
I have a question.
Yes, I'm sorry, Reverend Davis.
So again, the percentages were 75% was staff and 25% a combination of community. Do you know when it comes to the community piece, what percent of that, be about 100 and so, were students and parents?
Unfortunately, we did not have the same student representation that we sometimes find. We had very few students that participated in the survey.
And then the 117 that were actual face-to-faces, how would you break down those?
That entire list, the clerk, who we met with all that day.
Yeah, what
you
percent
have
was
a
parents and
copy
students?
of students?
Yeah, what percent of those was parents and students?
I would think a greater percentage of those were parents in the community. Of the people we worked with that day, and you have an outline of all those meetings, I think you'll find that that was more balanced towards members of the community than staff. We did not meet with a lot of staff.
So this isn't typical for other places that you have, where you have worked. Was there something that happened here with the district that hampered your ability to be as extensive and as broad as outlined in your first part of the presentation?
You know, normally, when we spend 2 or 3 days in a district, we usually talk upward to about 150 people. We lost a few because of the met with were more skewed to prominent members of the community that your board organized for us to meet, because you saw the list. So I thought we actually spent more time with your community people in the notes that we had. I don't think, well, whether we have gotten it or not, I think the fact that this document should be out there and people should say if we've missed something, they should weigh in with you. And that's what it should happen. Now, and that's, you got to start somewhere. Here's your target. But let me tell you what you ended up with, though. If you talk about all those areas on the leadership profile, you're going to also want them to climb tall buildings. Because to do a job here in a system, now remember, 180,000 school systems, only 1% over 20,000. You're talking about someone that has a track record also then in a diverse, multicultural community. People out there that are going to have people praising their work. You don't have a large population that has that proven track record of success. And that's what we're working for. We have, at this point, 15 applicants. We closed the search on March 10th. Of those 15 applicants, I think 5 are pretty promising. And they're the type of people that when you look at the references or if they are any of the people that you end up choosing to have a day in your district, you're going to hear very positive comments from other people that are on boards and other members of the community. That would be our goal. Our goal is not to get a large number, but get a quality member. So there's a lot of work yet to be done. And people have to be up to the challenge. I mean, that's just a fact. The Distinguished Educators Report, the response that you've done, it lays it out there. And so people that want to apply here should be very well aware that they need to make a commitment and they need to be passionate about taking youth that next level. So I think our process is going to allow that to happen. And I'm going to go now into some of the next steps to explain that, but I'm happy to answer any other questions you might have.
I was just wondering, did you just say that you have 15 applications already?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, so before the profile has been drafted, there's persons already?
Yes, from the very first day that we met and then you signed our letter of agreement, we put the advertisement out and we actually had people at the National Superintendents Association from our group that talked to some people, and we have some other leads as we're trying to get this information out.
But it couldn't have included what the community and staff
all
said
that
they didn't
information
hear.
in the process as we're vetting all the way up before we present to candidates, we will then give the candidates all that information. So that's just, it's still premature for them to have all the information, but they will have it. They will have it before anybody that you might choose to interview, they will have all the information.
And I just, I echo Commissioner Elliott's concerns. And also, I would like to see elevated, since it was a part of Dr. Aquino's report, that institutional racism is a key factor in this district. So I'd like to see that elevated as a person who's committed and understands how to address institutional racism. And it kind of seems diluted and less in the way it's presented right now. I'd like to be a more focal point.
Ms. Davis, I would agree with you that that was a prominent topic of discussion in all of our meetings, and we did put it there. But if it maybe even needs to be in bigger letters, I think that's something that you as the board are going to have to address when you're talking to your candidates.
But it needs to be in the profile, in a prominent place is my recommendation.
You know something? That's fine. When we do a draft profile, and if you have additional language that you want to make sure is clear and representative of what you're looking for, you should add that language.
Yeah,
I just want to remind folks that this is just the draft, and I think that's been said. So we'll have an opportunity, not necessarily today, where we'll be modifying this as we see appropriate. And I also wanted to add on to the issue of students. I know Carlos Garcia and I and the editorial board of the DNC work with students, and we had a standing room only audience of students at the Democrat and Chronicle. All their interviews, and the question was, what do you want in a superintendent? It was packed. Did you guys see those video interviews? 'Cause everything was videotaped.
No,
Have you
sir.
seen that?
No, sir.
All right, so we got to make sure you get that, because that room was standing room only with students from every background, black, white, brown. It was extremely impressive, and they recorded it all. And the DNC was going to play some of those interviews, but the condition was we wanted to make sure that they gathered students, and they were from various organizations within the district, within the city. So we'll make sure that you get access to that, because I would agree with the observation, and you know, the teachers did what they were supposed to do. They got on there, but it does seem that we couldn't rely on that as a means for defining, exclusively at least. It certainly is representative maybe of what teachers want, but because they were the ones that overwhelmingly responded, and because unless you get the information from the students of the Democrat and Chronicle, we want to make sure that the other voices are heard. It seems to me, and no fault of you all's, that the survey is weighted in terms of teachers and staff. And of course, the community that is served by this is much, 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 much broader than that. Would you agree?
I wouldn't disagree with you at all. In other systems about this size, we might have 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 responses.
Yeah.
In the window we had here and the way we organize it, this is just what happened. Yep. I might offer the suggestion that if you consider putting this report on your website, adding a section there with the comments of your students would be quite appropriate.
Sure.
Because not just of us getting it, is anyone that's exploring your website that's a potential candidate, that gives you a flair for it. I frankly thought there were a couple very positive things on your website where you had students speaking about, I guess, the path forward. I thought the student comments in that were pretty compelling. So I think you should use this in a very proactive marketing, and I use marketing in a positive, because you should be celebrating some of it, but also you should be acknowledging, you know, some of the things that you're looking for as a system.
Commissioner LeBron?
Yeah, so a couple of things. I would like the board to definitely have further conversation about the profile. I don't think that one singular commissioner can make the recommendation right now, but us as a group having a conversation about what that final profile will look like, whether we agree with this draft or not, whether we'll take into consideration that it is a little bit heavy-handed and skewed by one population that we're serving versus all. The Time to Educate is the project that President White is talking about, and that wasn't done in conjunction with this surge. So I just want to put that out there, because I know that although the room may not be filled, people do tend to watch this video and gather information from our board meetings this way. So that project is part of their commitment to work on education and educational issues. So they do a wide range of information and sessions, and one of the sessions that they did do was with students, but my understanding is that we didn't collaborate on them, we should have. So I want to throw that out there. But the other thing is that all of the board members had an opportunity to nominate individuals' names and put forth names of parents and students, and I certainly put a bunch of parents up. I also put some other folks from the community up, but we all had the opportunity to also name names and give names for the focus groups. And I feel like if we are not feeling like students were represented, that we should take accountability for that. That's just me throwing that out there. But also, you know, we have a responsibility to engage our communities and ask them to come out to these forums and ask them to take the survey. We can't just assume that we're going to throw a flyer out there and that people are going to show up. Like, I personally made phone calls to individuals. I personally reached out via email, via Facebook, and said, hey, here's the survey. Can you guys go on and take it? But also, can you come to the forums? Can you show up? It was unfortunate because we also had reached out to some folks to come out to that last one, and they were not able to attend. And so all I could offer at that point was the survey. But I just want to throw that out there because I don't want to give the impression to people watching this video that we didn't have that opportunity, because we absolutely did. And what we all did individually to promote that and bring people out. We say community, but when people say community, they barely bring them out with them. So I just want to throw that out there because we also have to own this. But I do think that as a board, we still have an opportunity to hear from our communities and change this profile narrative if it's not what we think it should be. But I would need to see evidence of actual more people than just a few handful.
One of the things that, well, let me get to this other steps, and I want to piggyback on what you said.
Before you do that,
yes, Dr. Kastner. In terms of you said there's right now about 15 applicants, and well, there's probably 2 weeks left for the deadline, about 2 weeks. How does that compare to other searches that you have done? And of those 15, and I don't know if you've done already a review of them in terms of vetting them with this profile that you just share with us, how do they look? Like, do they fit the profile? Because you could have 15, but if none of them fit this profile.
I think it's a little bit low at this time. I know that because we have some names that we're going to call, I'm not, again, big on saying it's just quantitative. Yeah. We're looking for qualitative. I also think you're dealing with a more select environment. Just got done doing a survey in South Carolina in a system called Sumter. Sumter has about, 18, 20,000 students. We had a larger pool, but it wasn't necessarily a strong quality pool. So just getting the names. What happens is people will self-select when we did our work in Columbus. In our work with Columbus, our pool was 25. So when you get into some of the larger systems, people self-select out. People might self-select out on geographics, whether they like the cold. I mean, who knows? But you're going to have a lot of people making those type of choices. You just want the people that want to be here and have that commitment to your community. That's what you're looking for. So I think your point's right, but you are going to get a smaller number when you're getting, and we learned that in working with Columbus.
Before you go on, I just want to make sure that the record is clear, because the district doesn't get enough credit for the work that it does, and I think this is very important that I say this. I have countless emails from Julie Phillips, who is the editorial chief, Sheila, what's Sheila's last name? Raymond, right? Something, Raymond? Where Carlos Garcia and I talked by email, met multiple times in this building in person, and when they convened that town hall meeting with young people, it was Anthony Jordan, our staff person, who facilitated those meetings. So I just want folks to be clear, because it's often so easy to say, oh, the district wasn't involved, but the district was involved in that. That would not have happened had not Carlos Garcia, had nothing to do with me, had Carlos Garcia and Anthony Jordan convened all those students. Those were our students, district students. So that, I understand there is this project that the DNC has, I don't know what it's called, but we said we wanted to collaborate with the Democrat and Chronicle in making sure there was student voice in selecting a superintendent. So I just want folks to be clear on this, because things shouldn't just be said and go unchallenged. This was a district effort led in collaboration with the Democrat and Chronicle to identify characteristics that our young people wanted in a superintendent, and our staff people did that work. Thank you. Go ahead.
Well, I want to clarify, because I didn't say that the district did not collaborate, Van. What I'm saying is that that was not done in collaboration with this search. And so that is a different message than what you're trying to clarify.
Mr. Kastner.
You guys may have collaborated with the DNC, but you know what? This is the first time I, as a commissioner, am even hearing that you and Carlos and Anthony Jordan worked with the DNC, because it wasn't part of the conversation around the search. And you did not share that information as board president with your board members. I just want to throw that on the record.
That may in fact be a criticism that is appropriately levied against me now. But I just want folks to know, because that wasn't the conversation a few minutes ago. The conversation was the district had nothing to do with that effort. And I wanted folks to know that the district had a lot to do with that effort, and Julie was not even thinking about that until Carlos and I asked her, how can we collaborate as a community? Now, if you want to say, I should have told everybody about how we were going to get student voice involved in this process, that's another thing, and we can talk about that offline. But I was addressing your remark, and by the way, I don't think that was a lapse in my part. Everybody's trying to do their best to make sure we have the next superintendent, and I don't see myself contacting people to let them know, hey, listen, I have an idea about how to engage students. The criticism was that was not an effort of this district, and I want people to know that indeed was an effort of this district. And our staff people, I didn't do the work, Anthony Jordan did. He was there talking to those students. That was our effort. We're blessed, very blessed, that the Democrat and Chronicle decided to help out. But we shouldn't just be saying stuff here that is not accurate, particularly where we own something good.
But my point is, it was not done in collaboration with the search. It would make more sense if we're saying we want student input and student voice in the search process, that should have been, one, communicated not only with the board members, but with you guys as well, so that you can get that input. Because now you've got this profile, and allegedly now we have all this input that was not even combined with this, and this is heavier on staff and teachers. That's all I'm saying, Van. If we are, I want student voices at the table. I'm glad that they collaborated, that the district collaborated with the DNC, but that effort was not aligned or collaborated with this search. That's all I'm saying, and I want that on the record. It doesn't make sense. I understand, but to do it after they're doing a completely separate search without the student input or student voices, and then we're just gonna throw it at them now, that's a problem.
Well, I just, again, I want to emphasize, part of the problem is we want to beat ourselves up, or individuals want to beat ourselves up for every little thing, even the good stuff. And I will say to Mr. Kastner, he and I can talk about this, Carlos did talk to, there are emails communicating with his staff about the fact we were doing this forum. They did know about it. So again, we can shift around and try to find things that are wrong when someone confronts you with accurate facts, but the fact is, we should just celebrate things that are good. Why somebody would even be talking about, well, this should have been done, or this should have been done. This is the kind of stuff that breaks people's confidence. All that had to be said is, hey, somebody said there was no student voice. So somebody said, hey, there was student voice. Let's just leave it like that. There was student voice. And I'm saying there are emails to prove that Mr. Kastner and other people know about it. My point is, why do people want to just, yourself in particular, why do you want to just talk about the negative?
It's not about talking about the negative, Van. It's talking about things the way that they actually happen. You just asked him if he knew about the student profiles and the interviews, then he said no. It's on the record. Just let it go. We're not going to agree. We can agree to disagree. Let's keep it moving.
Can I clarify one thing?
Sure.
It has nothing to do with the exchange you're having. My point in asking the question about whether there was anything that happened with the district that prevented that widespread awareness of what was going on here at the district and the superintendent's search is exactly kind of what you just lifted up, that the district reached out, or the papers reached to the district and brought in a whole bunch of people, a whole bunch of students for an event. So I was trying to understand, so we can improve, it's not that trying to be negative, so that we can improve next time. I understand that, I did reach out individually, I did give names for groups, et cetera, but to go with that, this is $1 billion organization, there must be a communications plan, a communications method, and I'm just trying to understand where that method didn't translate into greater awareness in the community, what was going on. If, Julie Phillips and other persons would have gotten the word out for us. So I'm just trying to understand what was different about your experience here, that when you do this in other places, you get 1,000, 2,000 persons when it comes to the size that we are. But here you get 75% staff and like just 200 from the community, and we have 55,000, guardians, parents, et cetera.
Well, Ms. Davis, there have been times we've actually only had 200 people in a system. So I'm just saying it's a little bit lower, but still we have to decide if it's representative. There's another point in time that you board members might want to consider. And let me talk about this. If you're not scheduling your first round of interviews to mid-March, maybe you want to do an outreach in some way to members of your community yet, some of your students, some of your parents. This report doesn't have to be closed just about what we've done at this point. If you still want to gather some other feedback, then you should. And if you choose to have people come to your meetings to speak to you, or you reach out to them, that's still a part of a vibrant process that you don't have to stop here. The other point that I would encourage you, and maybe a lesson is learned here, is that when you have your day in the city for your 3 candidates, you want to see participation. And maybe you really figure out all the way to pull out all the stops to get people that can actually see these people and give testimony on their credibility to give back to you. So maybe as you're learning that, that's probably really an important time, and communicating that important time. So when you look at this, when you release those 3 names of the finalists, and when you end up showing their picture, and when you end up showing their bio, you want to make sure that you're getting as large of the membership of your entire community. So you mentioned lessons learned. Well, this proactively is something that you still can do as a group. And the board needs to take that type of leadership, which I think you will. It's the most important thing you do.
And do you have recommendations that you've seen other organizations utilize that was successful in drawing the community?
We can show you examples of the type of events that happen in a day in the community. And again, board members are going to have to weigh in how they want each of their candidates, what their day is going to look like. An example would be they should they should visit a high school or a middle school. They should also maybe be part of a press conference at the end of the day where anyone in the community can come out and ask questions. There can be, who are the representative groups that you want to have them address? We can show you some of these types of examples so that you then can pick and choose what's going to best work for you. So we'll be happy to assist you.
Commissioner Shepard?
So far with the 15 candidates, they were just sending you resumes, right? Like through email, or was?
No, in order for someone to get in the BWP process, they have to go online and they have to do a formal application. When they submit a formal application, some of them haven't yet completed, but what will be part of that application, in addition to the 6-page application form, they will end up giving resumes, they're going to give their transcripts, they're going to also then give their references. But that's just the first part. And then it's the point where we're going to be meeting these people. Usually we'll use Zoom, and then we do Google searches, and we do a lot of deep background checks, far beyond what they might have in their references.
So that's through your BWP website?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so we should probably have a link to that on
You do?
our website?
I hope you do. I think you do.
Where?
There's a superintendent
Search.
page that was created for just here, a landing page.
So I would have to say, just of the 15 people, 3 or 4 are from New York. Well, you've got a big state. There should be, but even though most of your school systems are smaller, you know, you usually are going to see more people within the geographic area in the applicant pool.
Let me just say on this point as well, and all this stuff relates, the elephant in the room is people who, we're looking for candidates, but they're looking at us.
Absolutely.
And you got to remember, these cameras are on. So they saw a meeting 3 weeks ago, where our superintendent was accused of causing a young boy's death, right? People are I'm just being honest with you, people are watching. And so we have to be, and when I talk about being positive, when being positivity is warranted, people are watching. And we have to be clear about that. So people are wondering, well, why didn't we get maybe some people might say a larger group? I think quantity is important, but quality is more important. When you say you got 5 people that you deem to be exceptional or decent candidates, that's a good thing. But if you're wondering maybe why we don't have 30 candidates instead of just 15, it may be because they're watching us.
Well,
it's entirely possible,
let
and we
me-
have to deal with that reality.
Let me take that another step. I'm going to come back to what you
Sure.
just said, and I'm going to explain it. I'm going to tell you a story. When you get into your second round of interviews, you're talking about the month of April. So when you're looking at the month of April and you're going to do that, you know you might have a spring break here or everything. You want to try to find the best time that you're going to bring out the people. And then you're going to be at the point where probably by the end of April, you're going to go through the vetting process, the contract negotiations, and you're going to be naming your candidate, of which you're trying to have them report. Now, you've got a lot of moving parts here in this system right now. You've got the 2 reports. You got the issue that you're going to have a board election in June. You got the issue of, I guess, the fishbowl you're in as a system. So there's a lot of things going on here right now that, well, we hope you can trump all of this just by finding a great superintendent.
That's right.
And that's the whole goal here. But in doing that, when you look at yourselves, this is you. Judith, we were able to get your picture in this time. And when you look at what you have here, and you talk about it's your opportunity, and you talk about goodwill, I'm not going to mention the district, but in a recent search, we had 6 outstanding candidates. There happened to be some controversy where the board got involved with some issues and weren't looking well as a board. We had 2 drop out. Why did they drop out? Because for a candidate to move to a place, take their family, they want to feel they have a chance of working in partnership with the board. So you are in a fishbowl. But it usually is a time where I've seen where at times when boards are going to have issues, this is a time where you can come together. And even coming together as you're reaching out in the next month or 2 of getting more information, it's a matter, in my opinion, and this is why I use this slide, that the collective whole here is going beyond just your individual talents of each other and collectively as a board. Now, I'm an optimist on this, but I have seen this happen more times than not, that this is a time that you can all be at your best. And it doesn't mean you shouldn't be challenging things and going to the scrutiny that you will need to make sure you have an agreement on a candidate. And then I've said this before, and I'll say it again, you're not going to have someone come in on a split vote. You're going to have to reach a consensus. And when you're talking about a consensus, it's because the stakes are high for a candidate and their family as well as you. And that's the time you want to try to get it right. And truth be told, we've never had it happen before. If we can't get you the strongest pool that you need, then we'll go out and we'll continue working and bring more people to you. We don't want that to happen. And so far, I'm encouraged that it won't happen. So when you look at how this all fits together, we've got a lot of things happening in the next 60 days. Of course, you've got a lot of other stuff happening every day. But I hope that as you're working for the organizing the schedule and following through on this, that this is something we can all come together about. So what we have here, we aren't here every day. So now you have to use at least the point in time and the information we've given you to have people maybe fill it out, indicate areas that maybe aren't as strong as they should be. If it doesn't have some of the balance that you've pointed out, talk about how you might be able to gain some of that. And I think that's all what you need to do as a team. And if we can help in any way by giving you examples when you do the day in the city, we will. But at this point, Paul, Percy, do you have anything else you'd like to add? Do you have anything else that you'd like to ask of me?
Vice President Elliott?
Yeah, just a general note. I think that there are some opportunities where we can improve upon. I think that we have our colleagues who come with a different view, and that can lend to the conversation where everything is going to be continuous improvement. So nobody is going to have a perfect way of approaching this. But I think that because we have a diversity, our backgrounds are diverse, I think that will lend to a more richer outcome and more richer product, meaning the profile itself. And so it becomes an opportunity for us to contribute that which we know to make it a far better process. So I'm looking forward to what my colleagues have been discussing tonight and including that into our profile for our superintendent. So.
Well said.
Anybody else? All right, thank you, Mr. Kastner, we appreciate it. And we look forward to continuing to work with you.
Oh, President White.
Yeah, oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Shepard.
I just wanted to make one more request in regards to us having it on our website. So I did find it where it is. It's on our Board of Education tab. So I was hoping that since we only have a little bit of time that we might be able to put a blast on the front page so that as soon as someone goes to it, it comes up and they don't have to go searching for it.
I think they do that, and I was talking to staff about that very issue, and it runs for a certain period of time, and I think they have to redo it, but we'll check on that and make sure that Tom, could you check on that for me, Francine? I think they do that, but it only lasts, that banner only lasts for a certain period of time, but if you could check with Tom to make sure that that is put on Front Street, so to speak. Any other questions or comments?
One quick question for Mr. Kastner. The conversation earlier about the Democrat and Chronicles forum with students present, I was aware of it because Mr. Jordan spoke to the Student Leadership Congress. My son is on it. My son was there. My question for you, Mr. Kastner, is would it be helpful or enlightening to you to view the video on that, and is it too late for purposes of your report to incorporate what you might hear or take note of from that session? Or do you?
Well, first off, I have no problem doing that. Now, I was just thinking, you know, we can open the survey, reopen it mm-hmm. for a week and allow students to weigh in. Mm-hmm. And if we were asked to do that, we'll do it. And then we'll disaggregate the data for students only. If you ask, so we'll work with you too. I don't think we've done that before, but if all of a sudden you take advantage of that, and then also you want to hear something to see some of the data and see, what it looks like in comparison to the whole, you just need to ask us. We can do that.
Well, the reason I raised that is, and I wasn't sure I wanted to take time to weigh in on that, but the issue with the forum was that it did have tremendous amount of effort put into it by our CSD staff and communications office, Anthony Jordan and others. But I don't think we made an ask of the Democrat and Chronicle or WXXI to help us get our message out about the survey, about, and I wonder if that's too late too, whether we couldn't go to the DNC and ask them to put a similar banner on their online presence saying, parents, students, community members, you've got one more week. Get to this survey and give us your voice. If we could open the survey for students, could we not open it for another week for everyone?
Okay, let me tell you how this could work. First
Just,
off,
yeah,
could this
spitballing
happen?
here.
The answer is yes. If you opened it up, and let's say we still want to keep the window, let's say you go to, March 1. We then could still disaggregate students from everybody else, and if you then wanted to see the results of the next report, no problem. All I need is direction from the board.
And I'm just looking for ways to kind of compensate for that snow day. A way to increase our community input that's practical and possible. And if it's practical and possible, I'd like to see us make that effort.
It sounds to me like everybody agrees that directing you to reopen the survey for about a week would make sense. Everybody agree to that?
How's this? We will reopen the survey till March 1.
Okay.
That's a little bit more than a week.
Yep.
Well,
and so,
short month, but you okay with that?
Sounds like it.
And we will then give you the updated report, and when we do that, if there's a significant number of students, we will disaggregate it by students and send it back to you for you to share.
But on top of that, I think this is to Commissioner Powell's point, and I wish Carlos was here because I know he was, I don't know if he made that ask of the Democrat and Chronicle. I know there was a buy for WDKX for the forums. I think there was some engagement. I know there was engagement with the Democrat and Chronicle about how they could help us, but I don't know if he made an ask. So we'll check with him tomorrow. And Francine, if you could check with him, I'll check with him, because I know he had extensive meetings and conversations with them. I just don't know. And Mr. Kastner, and I know if he were here, he would say this. His plan was to work with you on this. I thought that's what he was going to do. If he didn't, I'm not sure why, but he clearly, that was his plan.
Well, like I said,
but
we're fluid. We still are fluid here, and let's see what we can do.
Yep.
So,
Yes, Reverend Davis.
But I just want to add that it wouldn't just be the Democratic Chronicle.
Sure.
It's got to be media that all sectors of the community. It could not be just the Democrat and Chronicle. It has to be media that all sectors of the community actually read.
Now, let me just tell you all. Let me just tell you all. These media outlets, I don't know about the DNC, because they did have an interest in education. They're businesses. And, I was involved for many years with one of our more prominent radio stations. And if the directive from the board is you want to make sure this is advertised, understand that when Francine calls these people, they may ask for money, including, city newspaper, the Democrat and Chronicle, the Challenger, Minority Reporter. They may ask for money, and I want to make sure that everybody's okay with that. I don't know what the dollar amount would be, but if you want to get this out, they may ask for money. Now, is there any concern or about that?
Yeah, I do, but she's been trying to talk, and then I'll...
Commissioner Shepherd?
So in regards to your question, yeah, there's a concern for me. Okay. But what I wanted to say was, if the survey is open until March 1st, what kind of timeline does that leave us to reflect as a board and say that this is the profile that we want, since the deadline is March 10th, and then we're supposed to start interviews
I would
15th.
think that if it causes you to amend your profile, there'd be no problem with that, because when we're vetting the final candidates, then we'll use the amended profile. I don't know what might happen, but I think we can make that work.
Commissioner LeBron?
I'm
sorry, go
And one
ahead.
more thing, and then I know that they asked that the board members take a look at the profile and then see if there's anything that we heard in one of the community forums that wasn't added. So I don't really know that you all need to look at the video from the students, because President White, you were there.
I was
So-
there the whole time. I had stopped in.
Oh, okay. Oh, well, then never mind.
One, I do want to say that there is going to be a cost. Nobody, I don't even think the DNC will give us the banner, but I don't want to speak for them. But they're a business at the end of the day, and any type of advertisement that we think we can get from them, we're going to have to pay. And I have concerns around that because, of course, our financial situation, so 70% of our budget, almost 70%, goes to staff and fringe benefits, and so we're really left with 30%. We have, out of that 30%, we have a commitment to special education students, ELL students. By law, we're required to provide those services. So what we end up actually having is a much, much less percentage. And if we didn't budget for that, I would like to know how we would pay for that. So I want to throw that out there. The other thing is that we don't have school this week in session, so it's less likely that even if we opened it this week, that students could respond through the schools. But I would like to make an ask that our chiefs notify their principals once the survey is open again, and do a push to principals, to do a push to teachers to get our students to take the survey online during the school day to ensure that we get the most student voice input that we possibly can next week, because they're only going to be back on site the 25th through the 1st.
Well, wait a minute. I mentioned the first, not being aware that you don't have school this week. If you tell me you want to go to March 3rd, you give me direction. We can do it.
Yeah, we're
So-
not in school this week. We're
So I'm
off.
saying, in order to, you mean you don't want to let something we do all of a sudden create a barrier, so if you say you want to go into the middle of the next week, that's fine. I will just wait to hear from President White on what you want from us after you have further discussion.
And I will wait to hear from Dan, Linda, I'm looking at you, to let me know what the chiefs are able to do in terms of speaking to the principals and so forth, okay? Because I think Commissioner LeBron has a good idea. I just want to make sure that it goes through you, then to the chiefs, and on to the principals.
Not a problem, and we
Okay.
can, some are working this week. We can get the word out that next week it'll be available and encourage them to give students that opportunity.
I mean, there's all kinds of creative ways, like when my kids were in the district, and I'm still around PIG, participation in government. There's got to be classes where the teachers could just say, okay, I want you to get online real quick, take this survey. And we could have at least 1,000 kids participating if we really tried. So that was a good idea, Commissioner LeBron.
Any sports programs going on this week, perhaps?
No,
No sports programs?
nothing.
So I appreciate your flexibility, and we're as flexible as our administration is, and I think I see a lot of heads nodding, saying there's all kinds of opportunities, and a couple of our chiefs are here, quite a few of our chiefs are here, all of our chiefs are here. So this can happen.
Can we
Dr.
try
Kino?
to have the same push with parents? I don't know if at the first time we send a message to the parent portal, but it would be great to get the same push that we're having with the student with parents, since only 25% were community and parents. But I don't know if it was sent through the parent portal messages, but it would be great. And I don't know if the survey is in Spanish too, but.
We were able to do Spanish. We only had 2 people, though. But we do have that availability.
So can I, I'm sorry, can I just add
go ahead.
to follow up?
Yep.
So there was an email blast to parents, because I'm on like the Parent Connect stuff, so I get those things. There was also robocalls that I received as a parent. However, I do want to acknowledge that a lot of parents may not have access to an online portal to take that survey, and that's how it came in. So if we could even print a copy of the survey and send it home in backpacks. Yeah, but not every parent has a smartphone. Most parents, well, Liz, I'm not, there's a large segment of the population that does not have smartphones for a variety of reasons in the city of Rochester. I know because I work with folks all the time who don't have access to smartphones, and we have parents who are in shelters, like the list can go on. However, but if we can also send a paper copy home with backpacks with students, that I don't think should be an issue at all. But I don't know if that could be an issue. I mean, we're talking about thousands of kids to potentially print out to, but it's a start. Also, our Head Start population should also have that through a backpack form too.
So Linda, as you sit here and you hear us all brainstorming, and I think there's a lot of good ideas up here, and I'm sure I saw quite a few of the chiefs' heads nodding. There's ways to, I think, creatively get at this. Commissioner LeBron reminds me that I was asked to do a robocall. I specifically called out the survey. That robocall was done in Spanish as well. You know, again, we can reflect on why people may not have responded, even though they may have been aware, but that's looking in the rearview mirror. I think there may be some opportunities for you all to try to at least, since the survey is a logical point, we lost a day from the bad weather, let's see how creative we can do. And I know you guys can figure that out. So thank you very much. And to my colleagues, the profile is this right now. Mr. Kastner, your directive to us, or your request of us, is to look at it, see
Remember, at one point, Commissioner Davis, hearing you saying all about the community. We're not going to get all. And so what are the numbers for us? What would we be satisfied with? It may be different from what the community says, because when I hear people say, well, the community says this, I don't have confidence in that, because the community may be 10 people over here who's saying their community, but then you're talking about 225,000 people in the city of Rochester. So we have to define what we mean by what is a satisfactory or an excellent number of people who we want to include in this process. Now that can mean not only for this search process, but when we're on other endeavors. What does it mean? What are we going to agree upon? What it means when we have people involved, and will we be satisfied with those numbers? So we have to determine. Commissioner LeBron may mean one thing, you may mean another thing. We have, as a board, has to come to the understanding of what do we mean when we say participants involved in this process. Students, families, other members of the community partners, what do we mean? That's something for discussion at another time.
And I think that's an excellent point. And since it's not on the agenda, Commissioner Hallmark, as you all know, asked you all to look at the first 14 recommendations to the Distinguished Educators Report and our response to that report. And you all have, I think, were they distributed, Francine? Yes. I'm just going to take this time to do this now because it seems to be appropriate. It's this document. Everybody see that? And the reason why I mention this now is Vice President, what's that? Can they sit down? Oh, yeah. Thank you, Dr. Kastner. You're great. No, we're good. Thank you very much. And the last word from you, Dr. Kastner, is we were going to look at the profile, tweak it, and get it back to you if there are any changes. All right? Again, thank you very much. But I did think this is a good segue. The last meeting we had, Dr. Hallmark, Liz passed out, said that she would take responsibility for the first 14 governance responses that we had and how we could allocate those. I want you all to, you don't have to fill this in now, but please look at this, fill it in where you think you could be of assistance. Liz, do you want to describe this very briefly for everybody? And the reason why I mention this now is Vice President Elliott makes a good point that could be made at any conversation we have. What is the kind of community input that we need? Is it that we're all elected by the members of this community at large? Is that the community input? Or is more required? And regularly, I have maintained more is required. But what is that threshold? That is a critical question, which I don't know this is directly addressed on this thing, but to begin to address how we operate as a board, when we operate as a board, is in part what those first 14 recommendations are about. So, Liz, could you sort of describe what your goal was here in preparing this sheet?
Sure. Folks will remember in the last meeting, I asked that the first 14 areas under governance be printed up, and we all were given a copy of this last week. And I asked that everyone take a look at the main recommendations and decide which ones they're most drawn to and which ones you would like to participate in, and get back in a week. And thank you to a number of you who did get back to me and listed some things. Didn't hear from everyone, so I just thought I'd push it a little bit further tonight. This is basically a list of the main boulders within this section. I just listed them out. I just listed them out in a table, and I put what they are. The middle column is who, so if you're interested in participating in that particular item, you'd write your name in the middle column, and then the last one is when we might get it done. So I was hoping that maybe by the end of tonight, people could take a glance at this, fill it out, pass it back in, and we can compile it, and then we'll have what is approaching a timeline and folks who will be responsible for moving some of these items forward.
So maybe tonight, after our executive session, you all could sort of take a look at it and then hand it back to Liz individually. That would move that process along. When Francine is doing a great job, we will continue in this effort when Sinead comes back as well, because this, I've said to the administration, and I would say to my colleagues, this is clearly the kind of effort that would need a project manager, or at least some understanding from our perspective that this isn't just going to happen by accident on all these different recommendations. Yes?
I could say one more thing also. These are a lot of items.
Yep.
And we can't probably attack all of them all at once. So by having everybody put their names next to the ones that they're most interested in, we'll see immediately which ones we can start on in the short term.
All right.
Van,
Yes.
Go ahead, Vice President.
Vice President Elliott?
Yeah, remind me of what is that you're asking to be done. I do know that I believe we need to have a timeline and this to be prioritized. What else are you asking us to be responsible for on this?
Well, I'm not necessarily taking the lead on this. I just wanted to put it in front of us. And once I collect everybody's preferences, I can put it back out to everyone, and maybe we can have another conversation about how we can best attack it. You know, if we need to do some committee, some special study sessions, or folks can get together and start setting up their own timelines, those are some possibilities, and maybe there's some other ideas. So I don't necessarily know exactly where we're going to go from here, but I just wanted to get us started with where the preferences were to make sure we had the entire list in front of us and the likeliest ones that we're going to start with.
Well, and if what I thought we had talked about was that Commissioner LeBron and myself helping to work on developing this framework, helping you to develop this framework, but if that wasn't my understanding, I guess I'm not exactly sure what, if each one of us selects one of these, what is it that we're supposed to be doing with it?
By way of example, I'm going to get to you, Commissioner LeBron, in a second, but I look at, like, third from the bottom. It says monthly meetings with President, 1 to 2 board members to collect interests and concerns and keep informed about leadership meetings. That was one of the specific action steps that we said that we would take. Coincidentally, I had my first meeting with Commissioner Hallmark today. But, for example, I would fill this in: who, Van, when, literally, I have all these meetings scheduled. I think Francine has got most of the meetings scheduled with you all, right? If you go to the one right beneath it, just by way of example, research best practices among boards, including visits to other Big Five board meetings. Literally, some board member could say, you know what, I think I would go to Albany and New York, or three of you could say, I'd like to go to, one could say, I want to go to New York, somebody else could say, I want to go to Albany, and I will look at those best practices. So that's how I see this working. If there's another way to manage this project, I'm all ears.
Yeah, I'm not sure, and that's probably something we discussed, because I think that's the example that you just pointed out was a good one. But when it comes to, say, develop a system to review the budget proposal for support of strategic plan, I'm just not sure how one person or a couple of people would go about doing that necessarily, there was another one I was just looking at. But that's an example of, I'm just not clear what the ask is, I guess. So.
And I think that's a great point. I think that some of these are simpler and some of them are more complicated. And I might look to the end of the dais here and say, perhaps we could get a little bit of some consultation, some ideas from Dr. Kino about some of the more complex ones.
Commissioner LeBron?
So the when part, we actually already put timelines on all of these action items, so I don't understand why it's blank and why we would put a person and then figure out a random time that we put when we as a board already responded in the action plan with the when.
I think, if I could just share, I think we put a deadline, but not necessarily the timeline, which gives, step by step when you're going to have this done. So I think in the overall plan, it's just the deadline, that this is when we're going to have this finished.
Right, so back to the conversation you were just having when we were discussing this via email, was that we should have a visual of those deadlines, because some of these are going to be due in February, some of them are going to be due in March, some of them are going to be due in April, and we should be prioritizing them versus having it in this format. The other thing is, I wholeheartedly agree that a lot of these things should be done as the entire board, and that's part of, for me, coming into this board over the last year and observing the way things have operated, where you have committees where just 3 people are there, hearing the information, making the decisions, and then you have 4 others who may or may not agree because they didn't get all the same information at the same time and have the same opportunity to give input. Personally, I don't want to do that. I think if there's some where people want to take the lead on, like researching other school boards, I think that's simple enough to do where someone can pick up. But a lot of these, I believe, should require input from the entire board, and we as a board should be working on that. But again, we should look at and pull out what's due what and what month, because that's not clear based on how we responded back in our action plan. All the dates are muddled all throughout the pages.
Go ahead.
Well, it's easy enough to go back to this document and plug in the dates that we put for when, but then we might want to further break it down. So I think it's a yes and. We can do both things.
One of the things that came about as a result of my meeting with Commissioner Hallmark today is we were able to discuss this particular document, and I'm sure she's open to everybody's ideas. But I said, for example, we talk about guidelines. And if you look at our response, the guidelines are the foundation for a lot of the work that follows. But as Vice President Elliott says, it shares the same finish time. So there has to be, when you talk about when, there's a lot more work that has to be done down this when column. Because as Vice President Elliott says, it's just sort of a generic start time, stop time. The guidelines, if you look at our response, it says, we're going to do so-and-so consistent with the guidelines. We got to hash, and you're absolutely right, Commissioner LeBron, that work would have to be done by the whole board. But I don't think Commissioner Hallmark or anybody is suggesting that if Vice President Elliott decides to go to New York, Commissioner Davis decides to go to Syracuse, Commissioner Powell goes to Syracuse with her, that they would make any decisions. What they would do is they would come back and say, okay, this, at a meeting just like this, because we don't have any more committees, this is what we have determined is are the best practices from Syracuse and New York. So that's how, I don't see anybody singularly saying this is the way it's going to be. We share this nice new table now. We have bi-monthly meetings. As soon as somebody came back with something, I or Shanae would put it on the agenda and we would discuss it collectively. And they would make presentations. If she went to Syracuse and she had a best practice, she'd make a presentation and everybody would say, oh yeah, that works, let's do that. So that's how I see this working. And I appreciate Commissioner Hallmark for giving us something to work from. But, and one other note that I think somebody already said, I think there are things that the whole group clearly has to own. But I think you could go through this, like the best practices in the Big Five, or the handbook. And you could work this as a kind of subcommittee and then come back to the full board. So all I would ask that you all do is at the end of our executive session, if you see something that you think you could work like that, just put your name in there. But again, Commissioner LeBron, everybody is going to be making these decisions.
So
yes, Dr. Kino.
Is the plan, Commissioner Hallmark, in terms, Commissioner Hallmark, is the plan to identify a point person from the board who will take the lead, whether in researching and sometimes working with the administration, and then coming to the board, because in some of these you will have to work with the administration, like for example, develop leading and lagging indicators, again, strategic goals. So it's like whether one or two commissioners will take the lead, work with the administration after the strategic plan is developed, and then come up with potential draft of leading and lagging indicators, then present it to the full board. That's the whole plan, and those that are more complex.
How is, let me just ask if I could, you Deputy Superintendent Michelle Miller, how are you all going to operationalize your plan? Maybe we can get some idea from you all, if that's okay, Linda. I'm sorry. Protocol. I apologize.
No, so we have talked about it. So currently, IM&T is developing a software system for us to input and keep up with the deadlines, so that it would have a portal in which to put your updates in, write your updates on where you're at in terms of each recommendation, that we could all see depending on the writers and how we roll it out. It can also, we think, sort by dates so that you can see where each date falls, which recommendation. It'll have a red light, green light where we are in terms of progress towards each the whole recommendation. We're still building it out. We should have maybe a demo this week on what that might look like, so then we can spread it out. We're going to meet weekly as an administrative team with all the owners in this document, and of course reach out to Dr. Aquino in the next week about what that might look like, so that we're talking about it, but at the same time people will be inputting into the system and keeping it updated as we go. So that's a variety of ways we're doing it, so meeting and the software system. Okay. And one last thing to add is hopefully a portal in which to keep all the documents, so it's an online handbook.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. President?
Yes, Commissioner Powell.
I'm wondering whether we're putting the cart before the horse just a little bit. When I was in Albany last for the Capitol Conference, I snagged Commissioner Ilya in the after she spoke, and she had not yet seen the report, much less read it, because she'd been out of town. So my first question is, how and when will we know that the report, or that our response has been approved, or whether she intends to approve it with changes, and whether they're her changes or our changes? There's a whole cascade of other things that needs to come out before we start actually taking on the, I mean, some of these tasks, we just have to do them because they're the right thing to do, but the sooner we know that this is the plan versus just the first draft of a plan, That's important for us to know.
So what I would say to that, if this is the plan that you believe in, I think you should do it irregardless of what the decision comes from the commissioner. If this is what you believe is the right thing to do, I would have started immediately implementing some of those things as you were drafting the plan. So that's a decision that, and I think I heard President White say a couple of times, this is what we believe, irregardless of whether it gets approved or not. So that's a decision the board has to make. Like my question, I was going to ask Dr. Massetti Miller when she answered Vice President Enlia's question on operationalizing. That's just more on the accountability and the tracking was, have you guys started implementing the plan? That was, but then that leads to your thing.
Yes, on a couple of things. We have February, March, and April that are here. So we are doing that. Some of those, when we put February, March, they were indicators or action steps that we were currently working on based on feedback we have been getting in operationalizing what we know we have to do even to get ready for next year, including the budget, so on and so forth. So we are doing some of that now. So yes, I did speak to the operational items, but the action items, there are some we are doing as we speak. At the same time, though, we are beginning to really deeper into making a timeline, as Commissioner Elliott said, that shows you the deadline, but really mapping out more of the timeline.
And I knew you were already implementing. I just want to remind that obviously the tracking and monitoring is important, but the most important thing is that you implement it and implement it well with the results.
Correct. Correct.
Let me just, and I appreciate you saying that, Dr. Aquino, from the board's perspective, we began implementing this long ago. I mean, the fact that we're having just 2 meetings a month, that was even done before we submitted the report. We have Dan and Linda and I met today, not today, last week, sort of as an officers meeting. I don't think that you are in attendance, but everybody saw, we began looking at professional development, and we had engaged Tim Kremer. We probably can't afford most of what he's proposing, but we've talked to Carl. So and we've got a peace circle set for March the 18th. So I think I think your response is what I would have said to Commissioner Powell's thing. This is just what we believe, and this is what we've got to do. And my hope is that she will make some changes, but that she will be a believer like the rest of us when she sees it. But time will tell, and I haven't asked, and I don't think Dan has asked, when she's gonna be done reading it and reviewing it, because at this particular point, if this is what we believe, with all due respect, what she's gonna do is not relevant, because we gotta get it done. So, all right.
Oh, President.
Yes, Commissioner Shepard.
I just have one suggestion for Dr. Miller. If in the portal, can you put like when you're meeting on certain things too? Can that be like one of the options on there? So if like on Tuesday you're meeting about the research best practices, that the meeting also is in the portal, so that we don't have to keep contacting administration. We'll know that there's a meeting happening if we're going to take the lead on certain things.
But this is ours, right? This is governance, not
no. But you had asked about the organizational, so I envisioned that we would be taking the lead on making sure everything is done in here, so it wouldn't just be governance. It would continue to be all the sections in there. And like I said before, I had already put my name to all the things that had to do with policy, because it's just easier to streamline one topic.
Yeah, I think when the commissioner looks at this work, she's not going to be looking to Linda or Dan. She's going to be saying, is the district doing what it's supposed to do? So to that extent, Beth has told me about this system that she's working out with Anne Marie, and we all are very interested in that, because my hope would be, even as we work on this, that this would be integrated into what Anne Marie is doing, that there would not be a single item of our action plan that would be excluded from that. As I said a board meeting or two ago, we all own this. And I think this is to your point, Commissioner Shepard. You know, she's not gonna, the commissioner's not gonna look at it and say, okay, well, the board did their 14, so they're good. It's all 84. So we're all in to all of those recommendations. So I think when we had discussed this before, I'm thinking if Anne Marie is able to develop this, she's including even, I shouldn't say even ours, but our 14 as well. Absolutely. But I don't want folks to think that we still should not and could not be doing what Commissioner Hallmark has suggested, and we can do that tonight. I do want to thank Linda and Dan, and I probably could have done this at the end of the session, but you all have provided, and I get this, and I'm sure my colleagues have heard this as well, you guys have provided some stability and some anchoring in a very difficult time, and and Dan's on vacation. By the way, Dan's vacation was planned before anything happened last week. He had told me when I talked about having this job that he was going to be taking some time away with his family. But I want to thank you, Linda, for anchoring this district. It's critical that we have that kind of leadership, and we appreciate the work that you've done. And I hear that from a lot of people. I want you to know that. I do hear that from a lot of people, inside this building and outside this building. So thank you. We have to move on, ladies and gentlemen, and the next portion of our agenda would have me hand over, at least figuratively, the gavel to Commissioner Shepard, just so that folks are reminded in this new practice of 2 meetings. During these portions of meetings, I surrender the gavel to a commissioner, and that means that if you want to talk, you seek to be recognized on this portion of the agenda by Commissioner Shepard. We did not, and I apologize for this, I take responsibility for this, we do not have times on these agendas. We're going to work on that for our next meeting. It's not going to be just 10 minutes, but we'll make sure that an adequate time is on there, and if it's not adequate, we'll address it at the next meeting. So Commissioner Shepard, the gavel is yours.
Yeah, so I just wanted to ask, Linda, do you have somebody presenting on this? Okay, Dr. Owens, you can come on up.
Good evening, Commissioners.
Don't talk too much about it before I got to go to the restroom, but I'm really excited about this.
I'll wait till
so
you come
slow.
back.
Go slow.
No, I won't say too much. I will begin by saying that there was a very... Okay. I'll talk about the Code of Conduct a little bit until Commissioner Elliott gets back. The Code of Conduct was revised in 2016, and that was due to requests from building level administrators and teachers and central office administrators, students, and families who felt that the previous Code of Conduct that had been in effect in the district was not effective in handling discipline issues with our students. And so in 2016, there was a new Code of Conduct that was written. The general idea or the underlying philosophy of the new Code of Conduct, it's really not new anymore because it's written in 2016, but it's still called the new Code of Conduct because it is a document that speaks to being restorative, speaks to building positive school cultures and climates. It speaks to addressing our students with love. It speaks to handling them with care. It speaks to progressive discipline, which means that you know, you're constantly putting in tiered interventions for a child before he or she is actually suspended from school. So that's the kind of document it is, and this is why we are going to see some of the results that not only I'm going to report on tonight, but they were reported on last week by the children's agenda. So I know that you all saw that report, so a lot of what I have to say will be a repeat. Okay? I made it.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So first I'll start with some news that's actually evolving. Suspensions have decreased over the past 3 years, which is really good news. We still have trouble spots in our middle grades, and unfortunately, disproportionality remains with African American students and students with disabilities, and that continues to evolve. So this next slide, and oh boy, you all have the PowerPoint, don't you? Okay, so the next slide takes a look at the unduplicated suspensions, which means that each student or each occurrence is counted only one time. In other words, a student who was suspended multiple times would still only be counted once. That's the unduplicated part. So if you take a look, this is a 3-year trend. If you can take a look at the orange, and this is point in time data, which was captured on February 7th, and it came from our Student Performance Analytics Dashboard, which we call SPA. So if we take a look at this point in time on February 7th, there were actually 145 students suspended, as opposed to last year in the blue, where there were 549 students suspended those first 2 weeks. Well, actually, it's the first week of February. Okay, so that's point in time data.
I'm sorry.
However, the trend is, oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I think we might have the same question.
Okay, what's
Go
your
ahead,
question?
Dr. Aquino.
Your orange, I don't know if there's something wrong with the key, says 2018, 2019, which is this school year,
Yes,
but then it continues to April, May, and June.
but that shouldn't be, I'm sorry, that's a huge mistake.
So I wonder if is it the orange is this year, not the blue? Because the blue ends, well, still, it ends in April.
17, 18, that should be blue, but the line is orange. I'm sorry, for April, May, and June.
Yeah, so the orange continues, the line continues till June.
Correct. It should be blue.
It should be blue.
That should be blue there for April, May, and June. April to
Okay.
May and May to June.
Thank you.
My apologies. Was that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, go ahead. Yep.
The clarity, wouldn't it be, I'm confused because we're in February now too. So now that you pointed that out, I'm like, we're also in February. So are we at 145 suspensions unduplicated so far for the month of February?
February 7th.
As of February 7th, yes.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay.
And Dr. Owens, I just wanted to request that you restate the sentence that you talked about with unduplication.
Unduplicated?
Yeah.
Sure. Unduplicated suspensions mean that each student or occurrence is counted only one time. For example, if a student was suspended multiple times, it would still be, over the course of the year, it would still be counted only once. Yes?
Oh, sorry.
It's the number of students, yes.
Dr. Owens?
Yes.
When the 145, as of February 7th,
Yes.
when you're comparing the 549 from last year,
Yes.
was that also as of February 7th?
February 7th, yes,
Okay,
it was.
Thank you.
It's point in time.
I'm sorry, Dr. Tony, I just have a question too.
Sure.
So in this chart, you're saying that unduplicated is the number of students and not the number of suspensions. So a student could, let's say student A got suspended 4 times, you guys are only counting it as 1?
Yes, yes. That would be duplicated suspensions if we were to count each time.
Are you guys tracking that somewhere else?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Can I go on? Okay, thank you. So if we look at the 3-year suspension totals, next slide, and I put more than 3 years here because 2014, 2015 was the old code of conduct, as was 2015, 2016. So I wanted you all to see that. But if you take a look at where we are now, we have a total of 3,419 students who have been suspended so far this year.
LeBron's point about the number of incidents. So if I'm looking at 2018-19, the number of incidents were, well, it seems to
Lower
me-
than the number of suspensions.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So the number of incidents, yeah, it is a little lower than the number of suspensions.
It is, yep.
Maybe it should be flipped.
Okay. So are these just incidents, not people?
Okay, so the number of incidents is 3,000, right, 3,198. There were 3,323 short-term, there were 96 long-terms. I'm in 2018, 2019, 1,811 in-school suspensions and 1,527 out of school, which totals 3,419.
Yeah, but should they total up with the number of incidents versus total of suspensions?
No, they definitely don't, they don't necessarily have to, because you can have an incident but not get suspended for the incident.
All right, okay. But, okay.
I'm sorry, Dr. Owens.
Yep,
I just
confused?
wanted to add another point of clarity to Vice President Elliott. And also, one incident could have multiple students. So,
Correct.
like, that's why it would be less, because if there were multiple students involved, then that would be multiple suspensions. So that's what gets you a number above it.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
I got it now.
Okay. Okay, so going on to the next slide here, as you can see where this chart is showing that most of our suspensions happen in the middle grades. Grade 7, grade 8, grade 9. So 8% of our 7th graders have been suspended so far, 5% of 8th graders, and 5% of 9th graders. And again, that's year to date. Going on to the next slide. This is a suspension subgroup analysis. And if you just ignore the numbers and just look at the pictures and look at the key, you can see that African American students are suspended almost 3 times more than white students. So as we look at the numbers, we can see that African American students represent about 55% of the total population in the district, but they are suspended at a 70% rate. And this 70%, 70, 73, has remained steady over the past 6 years. All of the data tells us that African American students, and all the research tells us that African American students are 3 times more likely than their white peers to be suspended or expelled from school. And this is what our data is telling us.
Looks like more than 3 times, actually.
Yeah, it is.
This is consistent with national trends, right?
It's consistent with national trends, yes. 3 or more. The next chart shows us students with disabilities, and these are unduplicated suspensions again. Our students with disabilities represent 20% of our total population, and the suspension rate for students with disabilities is 28%. And again, it's disproportionate. And that's across K-12. Okay, here we're looking at males versus females. And male students are more likely to be suspended than their female counterparts.
But not by much.
Not by much.
And it looks like it's almost half for the
Just about
enrollment.
a little
this
less
is
than
enrollment
half.
by gender.
Okay. So here we have the unduplicated suspension rate by schools. The first chart you're looking at is pre-K through 8 or pre-K through 2. I'm going to let you all look at that for a second.
I do want to ask the question.
Okay.
Why do we suspend pre-K and kindergarten? Like, that doesn't make sense to me. And I don't know if you can answer that, but I want the board to think about this. We're suspending kids in pre-K and in kindergarten.
Well, can we do a resolution?
Yes, we can, we should. It never made sense to me, but I'm just.
Yeah, I was at the event at the Beacon School, and that proposal came up, and I asked Amin, am I pronouncing his name correctly? Amin. I asked Amin, was he, because it seems to me an obvious thing to do, why would we be suspending students? And he said, because, the board can whip up a resolution, like, after talking to administration and doing due diligence, we could probably do this pretty quick. And he said, let's talk, as I had indicated, let's talk to the administration first, vet the idea, see, what would be the best response to that. But they suggested that at the meeting, but they don't want us to move on it right away. In good practice, they want to talk to the administration. And so.
But Amen doesn't work for the school district, and we're on the board, and all I'm asking is, and I'm not saying, I mean, Commissioner Vice President Elliott is suggesting we whip up a resolution. Of course, I would like to speak with administration, but we're suspending preschoolers and kindergartens. We're talking about kids who are 3, 4, and 5 years old. And I have a problem with that. We have adults that are in the classrooms and they can't manage 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. And trust me, I've taught kindergarten in this district, so I am well aware that they can be very rambunctious kids. I have one too. I always send her out with my blessing, and I know that whatever adult Sophia is going to be in the path of is going to be in for a challenge. But again, they're 3, 4, and 5. So I just want to throw that out there. I don't think that we should be suspending that age group at all. But also, if we're talking about restorative justice and practices, then we should be looking at supporting those ages.
Dr. Aquino?
I think one of the things you want to look at first is at the data, because at least here you only have 0.6% of students in kindergarten being suspended. In the data you presented as Dr. Owens here, no data on pre-K. I didn't even know that you suspended pre-K, but would love to know the numbers. And of those 0.6% of kindergarten, the reason for suspension, like was it a weapon or something, does it merit that suspension? Because it is very, very low. Does it merit that suspension? I think will be a follow-up question. And the numbers of pre-K, which I would be surprised, there's not reported here, but hopefully you're not suspending pre-K.
And those are questions that we can add on the log? Okay.
Did you get them, Francine?
Yes, I did. Commissioner Hallmark?
It was exactly the same thing I was going to ask.
Okay. Commissioner Powell?
If I could expand on that, I mean, we know that the state law mandates certain kinds of suspensions, weapons, for example, and incidents where a physical altercation results in injury to a teacher. I would really like to know if those were the circumstances, and rather than whipping up a resolution, if we could be specific about our concerns about pre-K, kindergarten, that be codified into our code of conduct rather than as a standalone, because standalone resolutions get lost. The code of conduct is the law of the land, as it were. On the topic of pre-K, though, do our agency pre-K, do they ever suspend, or are we only in this document, are we only talking about suspensions from our pre-K schools programs versus agency pre-K?
It's our pre-K,
So we wouldn't know, we wouldn't even have a clue if they were being suspended from one of our agency pre-Ks, would we?
No, but I agree with Dr. Aquino in that I can dig deeper into that data, and I can give you answers as to how many and, or if there are any, and what the reasons were. I can dig deeper into that, and I can provide an answer.
And I just wanted to remind the rest of the board that Vice President Elliott, through the CIGR committee, has invited Jasmine from the AQE Alliance multiple times to give presentations about suspensions, particularly for our younger grade students. So putting it into the code of conduct, I think, would be good. But Vice President Elliott has been driving that point home for a couple years now. And I know that AQE, which is the Alliance for Quality Education, that they are advocating at the state level to make it a state mandate that under certain grades that we cannot suspend. And so when we dive deeper, I think we all should also keep in context that suspensions also include in-school suspensions as well, right? So it's not all out of school.
It does. And along with that, there's also a recommendation that was made by the School Climate Committee on suspending students in grades 3 or below. So there is a recommendation there.
Just one clarification, so just like my Commissioner LeBron likes to say for the record, I didn't understand that any of the data you're presenting here is about suspension of pre-K students. It only seems to be kindergarten. This slide that you're here mentions only rate by school, elementary, pre-K, K-8, and pre-K to 2,
Correct.
which is the designation of the school.
Yes.
But not necessarily, because the data only starts in kindergarten. It doesn't seem like there was any data presented here that shows that the district is suspending pre-K, at least in this deck.
Not in this document. That's why I said I can dig deeper.
Yes.
And let you know. Okay.
I have, I'm surprised that there is 14% of suspensions at 58 school. Deputy Superintendent, do we need to send you back over there? You know, to the Deputy Superintendent's, you know, when we were over there, and I was the liaison to that school for a number of years, you know, one of the things I really appreciated about her is that, you know, they worked on not suspending any kids. But when I see now 14% at 58 school, that surprises me, and it says to me, you know, what's going on there and how can we get that, that reduced. So, and you know, the North Star thing, but let me just also go back to what I really appreciated on the previous slide is that we've got some schools that have like under 1% of suspensions, and that, in fact, I was just over at 25 school on Friday, and I'm gonna tell you something, that's one of our hidden gems, believe it or not. It's one of our hidden gems over there. They do great work over there. And she indicated to me, you know, we don't suspend anybody. So I was really impressed with what's going on over at 25 school.
Commissioner LeBron?
So I just also want to point out that I have an issue with Lynx even having 5%, primarily because Lynx is where we're sending our students who are suspended for services, but then they're getting there and we're suspending them again. So I just want to throw that out there. It doesn't make sense. I'm concerned with East Lower School being at 22% and North Star being so high, like the highest. Like they're literally a third of their population are being suspended.
But I'm doing cartwheels inside because this is an amazing report of where we were from 3 years ago,
Yes,
4
it
years
is.
ago, 5 years ago. It's been great work. This is something that I have been advocating for years and years and years, and so I'm just so excited about it. And while we're talking about these numbers as if we haven't had a drop, I just want to make sure that it's on the record of the great work that has been done around this. I know it couldn't be easy, you know, but I just wanted to, you know, the district heard the board, and I could just only see us moving in a even a more positive direction, you know, with this thing. So I'm really excited about this, and I know that there's some schools that wish we would not suspend, but, you know, they've got to do the work. They've got to, you know, find out what's going on. And a lot of times, if we just develop those relationships, that reduces suspension rates right there. We don't tend to understand that that's something that's valuable to this community, to this student population, and it don't cost a quarter, you know. So, well, that's just my soapbox. But I'm just really thrilled and can't contain myself.
Commissioner LeBron, then President White.
So I want to second that. I mean, I went to the presentation that was done at School 17 and showed the data from 3 years ago and went really in depth. I do want to put on the question log, though. I'm stuck on the links because, like, again, this is where we send kids to when they're suspended. So if we're suspending them from links and we're legally obligated to provide educational services while they're suspended, where are they going after links? Can you put that in the question log for me? What happens with that process? It's going to bug me. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay. Oh, President White,
Yep. I just want to piggyback on the comments made by Vice President Elliott and Commissioner LeBron. I too was at that event at number 17, and how we describe how we are doing is critical. And I know you all did most of the work that was celebrated. Our staff did most of the work that was celebrated over there. But it's amazing, an outside agency, which it wouldn't happen without them, but they figured out how to talk about it. You know, I'm going to be critical, but I want to be complimentary. Our PowerPoint, which, you know, you got to assume people are watching this. Our PowerPoint begins with, suspensions have decreased over the past 3 years. If you had been at that event at number 17 school, how the narrative in which how they described the decrease, they even said, I think they said 33% decrease. And I think this is what Vice President Elliott and Commissioner LeBron are saying. It's something to be celebrated. So people have seen me do this before. I'm going to be critical because I want us to be more complimentary of ourselves. This doesn't really, it provides facts, but it really doesn't celebrate, which you could have factually without spinning it. What a wonderful job, not only that you all did, and you in particular, Idonia, but the community that was charged with this responsibility, the task force. This didn't happen without a whole bunch of people, community people. So I would just suggest to you all, and I feel terrible because I'm trying to be complimentary, I'm trying to tell you all, communicate your message that you're entitled to communicate. This does not do that fairly. It does not do you justice. The other thing that I wanted to say is a process question for this new 2 meetings a month. There's some really good questions that have been put on the table, Commissioner Shepard, and regarding, you know, this whole suspension issue. And a proposal has been put on the table about perhaps eliminating suspensions. The question that we have to resolve, the process question we have to resolve, not tonight, is what do we do when we have good questions? We put them on the question log, but we got to make sure we don't have committees, at least for the next 4 or 5 months. We got to figure out how this stuff comes back to us. Is it, I'm just speaking out loud, is it the president or the clerk's responsibility or Shanae's responsibility to make sure this stuff gets back in an organized way, back in the agenda with the administration saying, okay, we've deliberated over this possibility of excluding suspensions for kids in kindergarten or whatever it is. And here are our answers to the question. I just want you all to know that I, for one, am thinking about, now that we have this new process, and I can't say, Commissioner Shepard, you got this, you vetted over in your committee and you report back. We have to make sure we have a way to come back to this very important topic. And like, for example, at this point in the conversation, would I be saying to you, how long will it take, Linda, since Dan is not here, for you all to answer these questions and deliberate over whether it is feasible or even necessary to eliminate, let's say, suspensions for kids in kindergarten or pre-K. Yeah, I'm saying that rhetorically, right? So Commissioner Shepard, thank you for giving me that time. I'm just concerned about the process for this very important issue. What happens next? Is this going to some black zone and ozone and nobody knows what's going to happen to it? I think what we should be saying to Linda or to Dan is, and again, sort of keeping this theme of, okay, administration, you guys are managing and you're coming up with the data. We've given you sort of a possible policy directive. Can you get back to us in, a month or 2 months? Hypothetically, what would you or Dan say to something like that? Trying to figure this process out so it doesn't get lost. Thank you, Linda.
My quick response, my immediate response goes back to the conversation we had with Dan and you on Friday related to the communication protocol, but in particular about the question you just raised is that we mentioned like that annual agenda on the board and how items get on board agendas. And so when you think something is important to come back, maybe you get the answer in the log, but you think it's important to have further conversation. Either the superintendent or the board officers, when you set the agenda, need to make sure that that gets on the agenda. And then that's how you prioritize what's important for further discussion.
Okay.
There might be, and I can talk to Dan and Linda offline, but there might be questions that actually should be answered beyond the question log. Because the question log seems to be, and that might be a board informative. And I can provide them an example which actually is a much complete, that gives rationale, implications of a decision such as not suspending kindergarten or pre-K, that gives an entire picture. So it's almost like a briefing paper for the board that goes to the entire board to make an informed decision. Then the board can make an informed decision based on the briefing paper, or say, we want to now a presentation to answer our questions based on the briefing paper. And that can be separate than not all of them have to be board informative, but there are some questions that should go outside the law.
Absolutely.
So I can talk to you, Linda, tomorrow.
Vice President Elliott.
Looking on the unduplicated suspension, and that the highest rate of suspensions is that 7th, 8th, and 9th grade levels. What's the strategy going forth to reduce that?
Well, I did put that in one of the final slides.
Okay.
There are some recommendations in the back. Let me jump to those.
Okay.
Okay.
The principal's voice, is that what you mean?
Yes. No, right after the principal's voice.
Okay.
Recommendations for addressing the disproportionality. This is targeted professional development and support for elementary and middle grade staff, with the hope that with teachers or staff working with those grades, the students would then be able to carry the strategies that they've learned, especially with restorative practices, through middle school, and then they would follow easily through high school or whatever positive strategies that they've learned would be very helpful to start in the middle, to start in the elementary grades.
The data shows that I saw this data, years ago when I first started looking at Data Street, the Monroe County Youth Bureau had a conference. And the data shows that they actually chemically lose part of the brain during that period. And that what happens is, in order to accommodate for that, it is important that we're giving our kids in those age ranges a lot of praise, a lot of love.
It's socially emotional.
Yeah, the social emotional piece is going to be huge in this area. So that's something that we're going to work on in that area. Okay.
That's a recommendation.
And I think that there's probably some training that needs to go into that, because, you know, you could easily get frustrated with this age group, you know. But I think to be able to fight that, that's where we have to really praise those kids.
The hope is that with the social emotional pieces and the restorative practices pieces and everything else that kids at those grade levels need, hopefully, by the time they're in high school, they'll be a little bit more settled.
Well, we see what happens. It goes down when it gets into the, you know, 10th, 11th, 12th grade. And so, you know, if we can work more on that, it may even increase graduation rates. You know, we may even see an increase in that. But that also shows me, and I'm speaking to my colleagues now, is that this is probably, you know, if we're going to experience a budget gap, this is going to have to be a priority, that we put that kind of social emotional funding in this area. So, yeah.
And I just wanted to add, because I know we do have to kind of wrap this up, but in addition to Vice President Elliott's point on how it drops, you know, I do want to suggest to the administration that we also take a look at how that compares to the dropout rate. Because I'm just curious about the correlation on that. Is it dropping because kids tend to get suspended and then they drop out because, you know, suspension, they've been suspended so many times. So I just want to take a look at that. And Dr. Owens, if you have anything else in your presentation that was pressing, I know for those that are watching, we only had a couple of more slides. But if there was something pressing that you wanted to go over, if you can let us know that.
No, because we were almost at the end, but I did receive some information from Linda that there are no pre-K suspensions this year. So maybe that will ease you a little bit.
I think we still need to work on the policy, though.
Commissioner Davis?
Hi. I just have one question. Do these numbers, are they maintained when we do the duplicated suspensions? I know it's not included here in the packet, but are these improvements maintained when we do the duplicated suspensions?
No, because many of our students are suspended more than once, so the number will definitely be higher.
But it probably would go down compared to previous years, correct?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Oh, is that what you meant?
Yes, that's what
okay, yes. The trend is the same. Okay. So I don't think so. My other slide talks about that most of the incidences happen in the classrooms. That's number one. And the number two area is the hallway. The top 5 reasons for suspensions, and I didn't do a slide for this, fighting and physical aggression, defiance, noncompliance, disruption, disrespect, and skipping.
And so I know you wanted to go through that real quick, but I just want to throw out there, I'm alarmed that disrespect is being one of the reasons as being suspended. And then I also want to throw out there too, you did have a slide on location.
I did.
And I just want to make sure that in our follow-up conversations that we talk about what some of the strategies are for different locations, because I don't ever want there to be something that's happening in the bathroom. I see that there were 53 incidents there. So I would like to talk about interventions for that. That should be 0, especially in an area where there's no adult attention. That's one.
Okay.
So.
But thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you for this work.
Shout out to Ruth Turner and her team too in the restorative justice
Whoever has been a part of
and
this,
Dr.
thank you.
Adonia.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Well, I guess, first of all, thank you, Commissioner Shepard, for leading that discussion. And I guess I can't say thank you without being redundant, because I think you've said it enough. That is good work. And I know, Dr. Owens, you have been a leader in this particular effort, and you've continued to provide leadership, even though more recently you were given double duties, and you kept your eye on the prize. And we, as Vice President Elliott said, we thank you. And everybody who works with you, we thank you for that good work, important work. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so the next item on our agenda, and I know Commissioner Powell will do her best to move this portion of the agenda. I figuratively turn the gavel over to Commissioner Powell to discuss financial updates and financial reports and finance and resource allocation resolutions.
Can
Commissioner
I add
Powell?
one? Can I add one thing?
Yes, absolutely.
To go with what Commissioner Shepherd asked about, looking at the dropout rate with this, can we also look at student achievement, improvement in student achievement with this?
And let me just say on that score, and Commissioner LeBron just stepped out, but she was at that meeting. Were you there, Commissioner Shepherd? They had a chart. This is what I'm talking about, celebrating in great detail your success. To your point, they had a chart that showed, and they get their data from us, by the way. Again, we're blessed to have this group work on this stuff. But they knew how to provide the message. They talked about the fact that when these kids are when these students are in their seats and not suspended, that there's an appreciable increase in, I forgot what the performance was it the ELA scores or math scores? There was some academic, what was it? I'm sorry, Linda, what was it? Courses passed. Courses passed. Right? So when I say celebrate our successes, that's our data. And along with the community, you all did that work. So there is an answer to your question, and I'm telling you, an outside group understood how to present that. If you were at that meeting, it was about celebration and success. It was about data. And we need to do that more often because we, along with the community, deserve that. So again, thank you for that good work. Commissioner Powell?
Thank you, and I'm going to turn it over immediately to Everton Sewell. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I think we should just go through the student activity report first. There are a couple of things. That's a simpler one to go through. So as we look at the activities for the quarter, we report on a quarterly basis for the student activity. We noticed that there wasn't anything really out of whack with these activities, especially as it relates to the winter time. So if there's any question on those items.
Hold on, Everton, just one thing. Is Commissioner LeBron coming back? Because we're not actually going to vote on this meeting. We're going to vote next meeting. But I would hate for her to come into next meeting saying she didn't know what was shared.
I'm sure I'm sure she had to take it.
Well, I hope she does. I hope that she'll circle back on whatever she misses then. Thank you.
So as it relates to the student activity fund, nothing unusual going on in those areas. All the schools we have are reporting. We did go to make sure especially the high school, had their activities flowing through. So if there's any question on those, the student activity, and if not, we can move on to the financials.
Yeah,
while you're formulating your question, if you want to ask a question, I'm watching the microphones to know who's in the queue to ask a question. So if you don't have a question, if you turn your mic off, then I'll really know who to pay attention to. Natalie, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem. So this is the sheet that the packet we should be looking at, right?
Yes.
So I had a question. If we can get the number of students that each of these schools are participating in these activities, what the student number breakdown is.
Okay.
Keep in mind that may take a little time to gather. Would you be satisfied if that information were provided the next quarterly report? Because we'll be voting on this at our next business meeting. And it does reflect just what the bank accounts show.
Right. We would have to go back to each of the schools for them to tell us how many students are actively participating in each of the activities at the school.
I guess I'm not really sure that that would be satisfactory to me because we are supposed to be tracking that anyways.
Right. This reports on the financial activities in the schools, but if we want to know how many students are actively participating, we would definitely connect with the school and we can get that.
not hearing any more questions on the quarterly student activity report.
I'm
Thank you.
okay with it as it is.
Thank you, Everton. Next.
And then we have the financial. You just had it up. Did the commissioners get this? I think Kelly may have just went to get the hard copy.
Okay, no.
Is it on board docs?
It is on, supposed to be on board docs.
Is it in the public section or the private section?
Oh, there she is. Kelly. She forgot it on her desk. Okay, so we're just going to go through. So, we have our mission that I've always wanted to state, and then now going through our agenda, we're going to go through each of the items. Now, from a budget highlight point of view, some of these we highlighted last time. Why we still carry them is because, as we mentioned, the amendment has not been done, so we have to carry them until the amendment is done, then we can start over afresh. So, for state aid, again, transportation aid, $2.9 million increase, and building aid, $1 million. We did talk about our local revenue, and you can see the details of those on slide number 8. Fund balance appropriation, we have already made the adjustment as you look at the financial packet. Now, to let the commissioners know, there is a complete, comprehensive financial packet that is out there that we usually submit, but because of, in the process of time, that can be looked at. So what we're doing in the PowerPoint is to highlight the key areas that we wanted to focus on to show you where the changes have happened. Many of the things in the packet are just regular items, but the things that are jumping out, like changes in revenue, changes in the expenditure, changes in FTEs, we want to make sure that those get highlighted. If you read the memo, it gives you a very good understanding as to what's going on in the financials. So we just want to highlight in the PowerPoint presentation some of those things as you're going through to note those. Fund balance.
Some questions?
Sure.
Commissioner?
Oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't watching.
So
Please,
it's okay.
please do.
So why do we have the increase in transportation?
On the budget highlight?
Yes.
Well, transportation, and this is revenue, this is aid. So what happened is when we put in the system what we call our ST3 reporting for prior year, the state calculates that and we get back 90% of that. So as we loaded our information in, when we're doing the budget, the number that we had loaded in was not already completed because you have until the end of October, November to load those in. So while the original budget was being prepared, we were still loading our last year's number into the system. By the end of January, we had loaded all our information from prior year. So when the state reviewed it, they said, based upon your number, you have an increase of $2.9 million.
And the local
I beg your pardon?
Local revenues, what is that?
Oh.
The local revenue is what we talked about last week, was last time, was the interest from the premium from the bond issuance and the interest, and those are on slide number 8.
And then just one last question here. How much do we have left in the fund balance?
In the fund balance as of the end of the year, because every year we do our fund balance, that's when it's audited, which is June. Our fund balance has $46 million in it.
Okay.
$6 million of that is unrestricted fund balance.
That's it?
Well, not unrestricted, it's called unassigned. Basically, you can use that anytime you want.
of that, there is a restricted amount, and there's an unrestricted amount, and a committed amount.
Yeah, the unrestricted is what I'm interested in.
The unrestricted is about 30, I'm trying to look at the sheet, about $32 million.
What was the 6 million you just mentioned?
Unassigned.
Oh, okay.
So unrestricted is made up of unassigned and committed.
That's 6 million?
The
total is 6
unassigned is $6 million.
Okay, all right, but the
unrestricted,
is 36 million?
it's about 30, I think it's about 32, 34
$32
million dollars.
So can I just ask to break that down further? So that 6 million unassigned, unrestricted is what we have. And the other is already assigned to something else, to other expenditures?
It's called committed, yes.
Committed to other bills?
Right.
So what is the actual amount of money that we have that's unrestricted, unassigned, and that we have to address any deficits?
It would be.
Let me clarify the question a little bit. The fact that committed is within the unrestricted means it's not to pay a bill, it's set aside as a contingency to protect us in the event of, for instance, you've got, well, you can list the, you can list the different categories of committed, if you would, please.
So you have what we call restricted. And restricted, basically, any prepaid expenditures, like when we prepay our insurance, that is restricted. You can't touch that. Or if there's any inventory items that you have, you can't touch that because it's tied up. So that's what's restricted. Everything else is what we classified as unrestricted. In the unrestricted, you have committed and you have unassigned. And in our committed, you will have things like our OPEB that's there. In order for us to be able to use that, we would have to come to the board, and the board would have to vote that out. But then you have the unassigned, which is $6 million. That amount, in the event of a situation, we could use that in an emergency without coming to the board for them to pass a resolution to take that out. But that is not something that we go in and touch during the year. It stays there. We usually have an item in our regular annual operation called our contingency fund. And that contingency fund, this year we didn't budget anything into that. East, you will see the report, East has a contingency of $350,000, and that's what they put in every year. So with that, as things fluctuate during the year, you can always tap into that. When there is some leeway, you can put some resource back into that. So it usually fluctuate anywhere from $500,000 to about $700,000 flowing in and out, depending on how things are going. Sometimes you'll get a windfall from certain items, and we keep it in that account. Other times, something will pop up that we need to pay, and we will dip into that resource. So that's a part of your annual budget. And so we usually don't end up going into our fund balance during the year. We don't touch that. So for this year, we've decided to, you remember when we had the budget adopted, we used $20 million to balance the budget. So with this, what you've seen here, we have put $5 million back into that. So now we're down to $15 million. Remember?
But the budget year is ended or not ended? Oh. I'm sorry. The budget year, you're talking about mid-budget year, or you're talking about you left $5 million for the end of the school? I'm confused by what you're saying, Everton.
This year, when we balanced the budget, we were short $20 million.
Yes, that was for the 18-19 for this year.
School year, this year.
But we're not at the end of the school year yet.
Right. So as we had the windfall, remember last time when we talked, we had the windfall of unexpected funds. $6 million. We decided that instead of using the $20 million that the board authorized, we say we are going to put $5 million back into our savings account.
Okay, so you took out of, was it 6 or 9 million that was total over that you guys got?
That was $6 million as of the end of June.
So you put 5
We
million
are putting
into,
$5 million back in, and there is a resolution.
but didn't we have increases in other areas as well in terms of expenditures?
Yes. So that's why when we looked at the revenue, how the revenue had increased, we couldn't put the total amount of the increase in the revenue, but based upon our analysis, we were safe to put $5 million back in, and we used the rest to cover any other increases that we have.
Okay.
So as the year goes through and we are getting savings, we keep putting money back into the savings account. So we just started with the big windfall of putting $5 million back in. So the amendment that we have now is to say we are going to reduce our fund balance appropriation from $20 million to 15. So it restricts the amount of money that we have that we can use.
So can I just, are you going to go through the PowerPoint? Can we ask questions on other sides, or you want to
can
go
ask
through
it as I go through.
Okay.
If Commissioner Powell is okay with that.
Okay. Yeah.
All right, so with that, so based upon the highlights, we were just highlighting some of the things that we are doing, because as you get the premium and the interest, those are windfalls. We knew that we had some transportation cost increase as a result of charter school, and we knew that we had some increase in charter school tuition. So we are going to need to use some of that money. So that's why the $9 million that we had, the windfall, we safely took aside $5 million off it, saying that we're not touching that. We're putting it back in our savings account. So that's where you see the fourth bullet, third bullet that says fund balance appropriation usage. We're not going to use $20 million. We're only using 15 as of this point. As we go through the year and more of these things happen, we will put more money back into the savings account. My goal is to get it under $10 million so that we don't use $20 million, so that we don't run our savings account out. So if we were to take a snapshot right now, Commissioner LeBron, the $6 million I told you about in the unassigned, once we do this, then now we will have $11 million in our unassigned.
Can I just ask you then, because like on your expenditure changes, and it's in your budget highlights, but you don't go into the actual numbers, but if we had this windfall of 9 million, right? That's what you said, it was 9 million?
For those two items.
For those two items. But we also had increases in charter school at 6.7 million, transportation costs at 2.9 million. Those two numbers combined are over 9 million. It's like 9.9. Plus we put 5 million in our unrestricted, unreserved fund balance.
Right.
Like the numbers just are not adding up for me, but, and I'm not even counting the increase in both debt services and substitute teachers, which are also almost 5 million collectively, 2.5 million, 2.3 million. So
if you look at,
how are we going to put more money? This is my question. How are we going to actually put more money into our savings, right, and save up when we have increases in those totals and amounts? So even with the windfall, like the numbers.
So it's not just $9 million. If you look totally, the amount that we actually got was, we have the $2.9 million in transportation aid. We have the $1 million in building aid. You have the $9 million in the local revenue, which made up of those two items. We have grant money coming in for $3 million. So you have a lot of puts and takes that's going in. So as you look at all of that, and we made sure to cover all these expenditures, we had $5 million that we could easily say, let's put that back in our savings.
After the increases of the expenditures?
Yes.
Okay.
We didn't want to, remember last time when we talked, we said we hadn't made the adjustment as yet because we hadn't done this analysis. So looking at transportation costs, looking at all the other areas, running the employee benefits again, where you recalculate your Social Security based upon the numbers of staff that we have. As we go through the FTEs, you're going to see that the general fund staff reduced by about 15 FTEs. So what we do with all of those puts and takes, we recalculate all the numbers, and we got some savings from those. And that's why when we make sure we cover all the increase in costs, that's what we had left, and we say we're putting that aside, rather than keeping it that it may end up being spent for something else.
Okay.
So if you look at number 4 and number 10 in tandem, it's balancing out to about $11.2 million.
So to follow up on that question, that 11.2 and 11.2, they balance out. The 11.2 in the expenditure includes the 5 million that you put into the savings.
Yeah, it's
Right.
the net, yes, the net impact.
And that's
yes.
why it balances out.
Right.
Balance, okay.
Because as your revenue increase, you have got to offset your expenditure for your budget to balance. If you don't do that, then you can take all the increase in your revenue and say, I'm going to camp it in a savings account. But because we know that things are happening, when we say, what do we need to cover the year for all these expenditures, and we recorded those, then the $5 million was left. Got it? You can always stop down and stop on down, and we can explain that. Yes. So those are the highlights, as you know, so as we go through. So then as you look at the revenue status, you'll see the same thing on slide number 5, $11.2 million. And on slide number 6, you see the areas that we are getting that from. So if you look at slide number 6, you will see where the increase in transportation aid, the increase in building aid, and it goes down. And again, remember, most of these that impact your gap is always your general fund. So as we look at certain things, you will see in our management action that as new grants come on board, instead of utilizing all those resources to spend on new items, wherever possible, as long as we are not supplanting, we would shift costs to the grant, and what that does is relieve the general fund, and in doing that, we have money that we can always push back into our fund. So we try our endeavor best to make sure that when grants come on board, we recode FTEs and expenditures to the grants, as long as we are not supplanting, as long as we are supplementing. And that's the grant rules.
Yeah, so the only issue I personally have with that is that when we do stuff like that, right, I think I've talked about this before, moving hardline positions into soft money. So when the grant ends, right, let's say the grant ends, that FTE has to go somewhere.
Right.
So typically what the district does is put it back on the general funds until it finds another grant to potentially fund it. And I don't know if they do that, but I'm just assuming that if we're moving FTEs on the back end, these are things people wouldn't necessarily see anyway, how their positions are funded. But I don't think it ever really addresses the fact that we don't really have the money for some of the FTEs. Right. We're just kind of moving them, hardline positions that we know we need into soft money and back and forth.
Right. Most of the grants that we get when we recode, it's usually purchase services. We don't have a lot of FTE in competitive grants. So the grants that we usually have are like Title I, where you need to allocate a certain amount to a school based upon the Title I rule. So that's where you find a lot of the FTEs, because those are recurring grants. We know we get $23 million every year. We get the 1003A grant, which is about $1 million. So many of these grants are state grants that sometimes when we are budgeting, they have not given you the green light that you're going to get the grant as well. So in order to avoid laying off people and reducing, we carry them in the general fund, and then we recode them. 1003A, which is a title grant, that comes in November. And usually we get it, but it's just that at the time when you're budgeting, there is no information that say you're going to get it. But for the past 4 or 5 years, we've always gotten it. So we know it's coming in. All right, so on some of those. When it comes to other competitive grants that are usually smaller grants, then most of those are purchase services, where we go with a consulting firm, Center for Governmental Youth, and all those other agencies. So usually those costs are in what we call professional and technical services. So you usually don't have too many FTEs rolling in those grants. One big one that we have every year is expanded learning time. We get $3.46 million every year. Sometimes the governor puts it in his budget, but he usually waits at the last minute to put it in, because based upon our history, he uses that as a negotiation tool with the Assembly and the Senate. So even though he knows he's going to put it in, he uses it to bargain to get something else.
Everton, maybe you could spend a few minutes talking about the trade-off. In the days before we carried employees through the summer until that federal grant went live, they would get the pink slip over the summer.
Right.
And we pay unemployment insurance. So it's not, so the practice may be unsettling to shift people, the FTEs, into general fund. It's not without its fiscal benefit to do that, if you are very confident that the money will come through.
And I get that, but I think when you mention Title I, for me, it actually raises other red flags, because Title I funding and what it's intended for, right, to be provided to schools, and it just makes me want, so I want to throw this out there, I kind of want to talk with Anessa about this too, but I would like us to look at Title I funding and who we're actually hiring under Title I funding and what those outcomes are. Because we do get Title I funding, and we do hire people under Title I funding, and what are the outcomes of that? And I think that is a much, much deeper rabbit hole that I'm not prepared to go into tonight, but I just want to throw it out there.
I do think, to your point, Commissioner, that we probably need to have a work session around Title I, because there are people in the community that believes those funds are for one purpose, but that, you know, the criticism has been that the district uses those funds for other purposes. So I think we need to be clear about, from our perspective, you know, what those funds are really supposed to be used for.
Just to let you know, we had a Title I audit, I think it was last year, and the things that we are putting in Title I, we came out with a clean audit. The one piece that they recommended that we made a shift is in our Office of Parent Engagement. We used to keep the fund in OPE and then distribute it to the school, and OPE used to manage that. They said we should not do that. What we need to do is to put the funding in the school, and then their school-based planning team need to authorize what needs to happen. So what we did, we stripped the money out of OPE, and that may have caused some conversation with parent engagement group that where is the money? It's now in the school. And just let me finish. So they have the money in the schools, and we can't, from the central office, direct that money. It has to be directed by the school.
Yeah, I didn't know about this.
Yes.
That it's now with the school-based planning team, but this has been conversations historically.
Years, yes.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
I just want to clarify too, so I did know about that audit because there was some controversy around even that large event that we used to do at the beach,
Yes.
and some of the fundings were used
Yes.
collectively for all the schools, but the school-based planning teams did not kind of agree or sign off on that event. But the audit that I'm talking about, and this is why I said I probably need to have a conversation with Anissa, I don't want to put her on the spot, is also on the outcomes of the staff that we are hiring under Title I. And what specifically they're doing, and how is that actually tied back to our student outcomes and their educational outcomes. That's the type of audit. I think some of the audits that you guys had last year, again, was about around the money, and yeah. So I have a different audit in mind.
Got it.
Thank you.
Got it.
We have gotten kind of bogged down in the presentation, so if we can get.
So again, the special aid revenue are our grants. If you notice, there's a $3.2 million increase. And as the year goes by, I remember last year we ended up with about $134 million in grant fund. So we aggressively go after grants, and many of them are competitive and some of them are state, so we do that.
Just one, do these grants align with our strategic plan or what we want to accomplish. I mean, we're just not going after money to be going after money because it doesn't make sense if it doesn't line up with our strategic plan or our goals, board goals, district goals.
The answer to that is first no and then yes. Because when we started out, when I just started out, we used to just go after grants. But now we're taking a more focused approach. And there are some grants where people have called us and say, we have this money, and we say thanks, but no, because it doesn't align. So our grants, writers, and one of the things that our grant writers do is when a grant comes on board, the first thing we do is get in touch with the instructional staff and say, here is something that we are seeing, is this aligned? On the other hand, what they will do is the instructional staff will say, could you go out there and see if there is any grants in this area? And we go out and then we search. Sometimes we make a hit, sometimes we don't. So it comes from both ends. The grant department is searching for grants. They bring it to the instructional team and say, this is what we are seeing, does it align? And then on the other side, sometimes they come to us and say, we're planning on doing this. Could you go out there and do the search for us? So we do both of those. So again, the answer is no from the past, but now I'd say for this year, we're taking a very much more laser focus by working more closely with the instructional team to make sure that grants that we're bringing in or we're going after aligns with our strategic plan. So again, all the revenue changes, we talked about most of those last time. And the expenditures, we have talked about those. Expenditure changes, Commissioner LeBron kind of alluded to that, and we talked about that. So some of the things that you see, like the salary, a decrease of $1.3 million, is as FTEs shift and we hire new staff, in positions, sometimes you have breakage, because people may have retired, we bring in a person lower salary. The benefits, we have scrubbed that. We have looked at Social Security, we look at our payroll taxes, and that's where we get whatever breakage we can from that. So we do that line by line. Charter school, again, FTEs are going up. Charter school costs are going up. Transportation, as Mike Schmidt and his operation moving, to fund those. Teacher substitute, we see an increase in that. And that's a result of, as I mentioned last time, teacher substitute costs was basically budgeted for where teachers are absent from their regular duties, and then we have to call a sub in. What's happening with this number is because we have vacant positions. We have to go out and get substitute teachers to fill those vacancies. So the majority of that $2.3 million is sitting in a vacancy FTE that we have budgeted. So what we do is reshuffle those dollars to fund the substitute, because we budgeted the FTEs, but there's no one in the position, so we bring in the substitutes.
So this might be a question for the question log. I just want to know, so with transportation having an increase of $2.9 million, what do we then do as a district with that additional money, since we've already budgeted bus routes and things like that?
No, this is increasing costs.
But you said
said
that there was an increase in aid.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm saying, we were saying when Commissioner LeBron was talking, when we look at all the expenditures, because what we do with transportation, every department, we would say to Mike, let us know, based upon your projection, if the amount that we have in transportation is adequate based on what's going on in charter school, based on what's going on in special ed. They mentioned that their cost is going to be an additional $2.9 million. So as we look at the revenue that we were getting from the aid, that basically offset that $2.9 million. So
yeah, so you're telling me it's just a coincidence that the aid matched what we projected?
That is just a coincidence.
Okay.
So what we do, if you notice everything else on that sheet, Commissioner Shepherd, is that there are other things that's going on in all of those expenditure area. So we look at all the pot that we have for all the increase in revenue, and then we look at all the increases that we know as we forecast for the end of the year in all the expenditure areas, and we see, can we cover those? And based upon we covering them, $5 million we had left and we say, let's put that back in our savings.
So was this an anomaly in terms of the increase in transportation
Yes.
for this year?
Yes.
And was due to, I know you mentioned charter, but
Charter school and some of our special ed requirements, as our special ed needs go up and they start transporting special ed students.
and the charter was not, you weren't able to project it?
No, because for one, we saw some of the student population going up, for one. And two, and I can check with Mike Schmidt on that, their routing, one of the things I know they were discussing is how we can get charter school on the same schedule like we do. And I don't know exactly where that is. But, you know, Mike is having that discussion with them to see how we can get them to be aligned. Because one of the things you'll hear Mike talk about transportation is you don't want a third tier. So if you can get everybody on 2 tiers, that's the best thing to do. You have a third tier, and then you have to start getting other buses from first student, rather than running first tier, second tier. Anytime you have a third tier, it puts a little kink in. And I know he has discussed that with our team, where he says, if somebody wants to go from a late start to an early start, they've got to find another school that wants to go the other way, because if not, you have a third tier, and that's not something that he has.
And the dilemma is we don't control the charter schools. We can't dictate that. And they have extended day programs often that don't align with our school end times.
Right. I know charter school, we have them on, many of them on yellow buses. One of the things I know Mike is contemplating is whether we should put them on RTS buses. That has not been decided as yet, but I know.
I just ask you, when you say that, you're talking about students that are old enough to, like, the same schedule as us for, who are you talking about? I'm confused, I'm sorry. So for our 7th through 12th grade population that we put on RTS,
Right.
Are charter schools 7 through 12 getting yellow buses? Is that what you're saying?
Some of them do, and I think he has some of them on RTS. So some of the schools have like 6th graders.
Yeah, but we've had this discussion. I'm not supporting any 6th graders on an RTS bus.
Right, but I'm just saying, he has been having that discussion with the charter school.
You
So I
shouldn't
don't
be
know
having
where-
it with them either. They're still our kids at the end of the day that live in our communities. We shouldn't have 6th graders on RTS. So Mike, if you're watching or listening.
Let's take that offline, because quite frankly, that's negotiated as much by the charter school operators as anybody else. And if they don't want it to happen, it's not going to happen. So let's, we're going to need to, like,
So
are we
the
almost
last-
done? Okay.
If we just look at the slide number 11, this is something I wanted to bring to the board differently, because what we have been doing is this document, and you'll see it in your packet it's a long legal page, is not just to look at the current year, but also compare it with where we were a year ago. So you will see where we compare current year to prior year at this point in time. So the main thing that you need to look at is the percentages, because the dollars may change. So as you look at the percentage usage, those are the 2 numbers I wanted to bring to your attention to compare, to see, are we on target? So total of all expenditures, last year this time we were at 56.5%. Currently, we're about 57.2%, so a difference of 0.7%. So we see our numbers running consistent with prior year. So that's one of the measures that you can look to see, how are we doing as it relates to prior year in terms of the usage of our budget. And the last thing I wanted to highlight is on slide number 13 and 14 is our FTE change. When we had our finance team, we decided that we were going to do this on a quarterly basis. So if you look at that, overall, our FTEs went up by about 29.78 FTEs. And we've broken that out into what's general fund, what's special aid fund. If you notice, 15.49%, 15 FTEs have been taken out of the general fund and have been put into grants as we go through the year. So the increase that you're seeing there are mainly funded by special aid and grant fund. So it's not impacting our budget gap, it's actually helping our budget gap. And I get your point, Commissioner LeBron, about sustainability. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, if I could, so I'm hoping that if they're in a grant-funded position, that if that grant ends, that we're not putting those people within
The general fund.
the general fund. That we, if the grant ends, so does the job end, so.
So every year when we do the budget, we take a list of all the positions and we take a look at those with the deputies and say, okay, the grant is ending. Here's a list of all the grant-funded positions that are going away. And we look at each of those one by one. And I can tell you for this year, we have taken out many of those FTEs out of the budget.
Okay.
Some of them may be critical because one such, let me just tell you, there's a position, and we have been thinking about it, Dr. Mercedes Miller and myself have been thinking about that. It is Director of Community School. Even though the community school grant is going away, based upon the governor's budget, there is a $14 million community school set aside that he has directed in the foundation aid. So if we need to ensure that we execute community school, it's kind of prudent to make sure we have a director of community school because the dollars are there in the general fund to carry it. In the past, when we had the grant, we could easily put it in the grant. But now that he is set aside, we've gotten $14 million to do community schools. If we don't have a community school director, then how important have you taken community school? So we have discussed that, Deputy Superintendent and myself, and I think we are still deciding how we should move forward on that. Okay. But we do have money set aside, and the community schools set aside, there are stringent requirements that say you have to do certain things. One of the things the Big Five is doing when we go to Albany next week is to say, give us a little bit more leeway as to how we can use this community school set aside. It's a very big thing with the Big Five districts, because they basically restrict you to a lot of things. And we're saying we need you to lax the rules a little bit so we can use that to do more of what we want.
All right.
So that's just one example of a position.
Everton, does that conclude your presentation?
That concludes my
presentation. I have one more question, sorry. Sorry.
Okay. Beatrice and then Dr. Aquino.
Thank you. So you kind of went over the management continued actions about position controls, right. And then you mentioned the director of community schools, and I don't know how serious we take that position in this district, because we actually made a decision to put someone in there temporarily that was not going to be here, and everybody here kind of knew that, and they ended up still voting for that. So I don't know how committed we are, but what I will say on the position control and the hold on hiring on central office vacancy positions, I had submitted an email about a specific position in central office that was being interviewed for. And that was my understanding too, that we did have a hold right now on hiring here. And I never really got a direct answer as to why we're interviewing for that position if we have a hold. Because I have some concerns about that position and us hiring for that position. So I just need to understand if all departments are aware that there is a hold right now, why are some of them still interviewing?
Commissioner LeBron, is that question been submitted to the question log?
Yep, twice. And it was answered, but the answer was not satisfactory for me. It didn't.
Perhaps that is an
informative.
A scenario for the informative, which is, by the way, that the Board of Regents gets its information from Board of Regents staff. That's the format that they use, right? And it usually comes with recommendations, and that's what the regents act on, and not just random resolutions. Dr. Aquino, you had a question?
Yes, one general question, Everton. Do you think the community at large is aware of the seriousness seriousness of the structural deficit that the district is facing. I asked that question because I attended one of the town hall. Commissioner LeBron was there, and Dr. Massetti Miller was there. And when the community was giving input, they were giving input on what they didn't want to see cut, and they were giving it like, we want this expanded, expanded, expanded. But it was like not a conversation except for one gentleman who had one suggestion of something to be eliminated, but it was just like, add this, add this, add this. So I left that meeting with like, do they realize that the district has to cut? So it's like, just expand this and add this, and we want this, and we want this.
Commissioner Powell, can I interject in this too? One of the things, and I'll be just asking make a quick request around the communications plan, but I sent out to the board about what are some of the topics that we need to be addressing in the community. And from my perspective, the budget is one of those, so that we can talk about that it's limited. I mean, you really talk about, communicate the hard questions out there and the hard issues that we're facing. And so that's one of the things I would like the board to be able to do, is to go out in the community via our communications plan and take a look at it. That's one of the topics that I'm interested in us being in the community about.
Thank you for that. Because it was also one of my recommendations too.
Right.
Okay.
And we're working on getting that structure because, and you're correct, sometimes when we talk numbers to them, sometimes the volume and the magnitude of the number, they can't comprehend that. One of the things that I've been doing is working with Georgetown University, and we had a session last month, and then we have weekly session to do things differently by breaking our numbers down. I know Dan had asked about it, into per pupil cost. Every time you put a number, break it down into per pupil. They tend to grasp that a little bit easier when you start, rather than saying $40 million, they have no concept as to what that means. But if you start breaking it down, I've been thinking about how do we break it down to get the message, working with communication department to address your recommendation, Dr. Aquino, how we will break it down so that when they hear it, they can understand it. And that's one of the things I've been working on.
Just a comment. Just wanted to appreciate you for this format. I think it's very clear. And that this thing that you just put together, maybe the two of you developed it together. And I know this took a longer time tonight, but I trust that we're going to kind of tighten it up. And yes. I think it's been a very informative conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add to the staff as well. I know that we have already been instructed by the state with new regulations that we should be breaking it down per pupil. So I want to make sure that we're doing that for everything.
Yes.
Okay.
Commissioner Hallmark closed the way I would have liked to close, and that's fine. So now I don't have to repeat myself. I do hope that in months to come it gets tighter as we all become more familiar with the language of budgets and financial presentations. If it doesn't, I think we should have a table here because Everton is not Rumsfeld in his standing desk, and he ought not to have to stand this long, nor should any staff member who is subjected to prolonged question and answer. So just a suggestion for future meetings, maybe we should have a mic'd up table in the center of the room for staff members. And thank you, Everton, for your presentation. Welcome. No vote on these this month. We will have a budget amendments on the agenda at our next business meeting, as well as all the other, the financial reports, the student activity reports, and all of the usual individual resolutions. So I return the mic to the gavel to you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Commissioner Powell. We're going to move right along here for consideration of one resolution, and that is Resolution 644. Can I get a motion to discuss Resolution 644 made by Commissioner Hallmark, seconded by Commissioner Davis. Any questions or comments regarding that resolution, 644?
I didn't get a chance to read the resolution.
Take your time, take your time. It's a short one.
Oh, this is about standard work day, okay.
Yep.
Okay,
That's the only thing
all
we're
right,
voting on.
very good.
All right, there being no questions or comments, all those in favor of Resolution 644, say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposition? Ayes have it. It's not on the agenda, but Vice President Elliott wanted to talk about the communication plan, and I would put that under new business. Vice President Elliott?
I would just, I believe everyone received an email about topics that we want to begin in terms of operationalizing the communications plan. So I would just ask that you all get back to me on that, and maybe at the next meeting we can talk about it more in detail of those topics. I'm recommending that we get out in the community and talk about the budget and, you know, what can we do between now and the end of the school year is what I'm interested in. So please get back to me. And then I think what we need to do is talk about format and how we want to roll it out, what have you. So thank you.
All right. I have some good news for you folks. What's that?
Just one other thing. Thursday night, are we having the Taylor Law?
That's my understanding.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. What I was going to say is I have some good news. There are no contractual matters to discuss in executive session. No, let's build this up for a minute. Let's enjoy this moment.
Hallelujah.
No personnel matters to discuss in executive session.
Tyler Perry said that thing,
And
hallelujah.
no disciplinary matters to discuss in executive session. So I will not entertain any motion to go into executive session. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
What? Oh my God.
It's been moved in second, and good night, everybody.
Good night.